Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Grant Hendrickson and Michele Cartagena. Grant Hendrickson, born on September 20th, 1972, in Macon, Georgia, was an outdoor enthusiast who enjoyed fishing, golf, canoeing, and camping. Like his girlfriend, he was also an active volunteer in the community, having worked at the Museum of Arts and Sciences in Macon since the age of 15. Their active lifestyles likely drew them together, according to those who knew them. Grant's girlfriend, Michele Cartagena, was born on May 2, 1975, in Monterey, California. She was a well-rounded and talented individual. She played in her school's marching orchestra band, was the top singles tennis player, and led her school softball team. Additionally, she was a member of the National Honor Society. Outside of school, Michele volunteered with the Red Cross and an animal welfare association, and she often visited elderly people. Her father remembered her as a caring and driven individual who aimed to pursue a career in medicine to help others and give back to society. January 3, 1995, brought a grim discovery to the typically quiet area of Juliet Lake. A passerby reported finding two lifeless bodies while walking near the lake. The local sheriff and his deputy responded to the scene, where they were met with a shocking sight. Their office was not accustomed to handling serious crimes, as fights and thefts were the norm. The deputies were not prepared for what they found: a white Honda parked on the lake's shore, with the body of a man inside and her body lying on the ground nearby. The cause of death was evident, even to a non-expert: both victims had been shot. The car contained the victims' personal belongings, including identification, which revealed the identities of the victims. The male victim was 22-year-old Grant Hendrickson, who was found in the driver's seat. The second victim was 19-year-old Michele Cartagena. The police were alerted to the incident, and officers from the Major Crimes Unit, along with forensic experts, arrived at the lake. The detectives' attention was immediately drawn to Michele's body, which was partially exposed with her skirt pulled up, suggesting a possible motive for the crime. An examination of the car revealed bullet holes, leading detectives to believe that the perpetrator had opened fire on them while they were inside. Grant was hit by 3 bullets and had no chance of survival. Michele was shot twice and likely remained conscious as the perpetrator pulled her from the car. The position of Michele's body, with her legs spread apart, suggested that the perpetrator may have intended to take advantage of her vulnerable state, but did not do so. Forensic experts found a substance on the inside of her thighs, which was later identified as saliva containing chewing tobacco particles. The saliva samples were sent to the lab for further analysis. During the crime scene investigation, police discovered important evidence, including bullet casings of 2 different calibers, 13.223 caliber casings and 4 9mm casings. The presence of 2 types of ammunition suggests that there may have been 2 perpetrators, each using a different weapon. The families of Grant and Michele were shocked and stunned when they learned about the tragedy. They struggled to comprehend who could have committed such a heinous act against their children. As only children, Grant and Michele were extremely close to their parents. They had been dating for over a year and had already made plans for their future together, including their upcoming wedding. When detectives couldn't identify any enemies or suspects through family and friends, they began investigating further. They visited Mercer University in Macon, where Grant and Michele were classmates, to gather more information and piece together the events surrounding the tragedy. The police investigation into the deaths of Michele and Grant was ongoing, but they had not uncovered any significant leads. Both victims were well-liked and respected at the university, with no known conflicts or enemies. Initially, detectives considered the possibility that the killer might have been a man who had romantic feelings for Michele and was rejected, but this theory was not substantiated and was eventually set aside. A visit to Mercer University did not yield any useful information for the police. However, By reconstructing the events of January 2nd, the detectives learned that Michele and Grant had gone to a restaurant, followed by a movie. After the film, they headed to a holiday camp at Juliet Lake. The camp was open to the public 24/7 and featured a boat launch, parking area, small dock, and picnic tables. Since it was a free public space, there was no staff or security present on the night of the crime. Other people were in the area, but they did not report anything suspicious. Some individuals did hear loud noises, which they initially dismissed as firecrackers. A witness reported seeing a 1980s Honda CRX speeding out of the parking lot. Meanwhile, investigators found a DNA sample in saliva on Michele's thigh. However, at the time, DNA technology was still in its early stages. The DNA Identification Act, which allowed the FBI to create a national DNA database, was not passed until 1994. As a result, there was no database to compare the DNA sample to, and it could only be matched by directly comparing it to the perpetrator's DNA. The investigation also included questioning staff at the restaurant and cinema that Grant and Michele visited before their deaths, but nothing suspicious was found. The authorities considered the possibility that they might have been random victims or had a chance encounter with someone who became violent. The detectives found no evidence of any other motives, as they had good grades, no connections to shady individuals, and did not use illicit substances. The fact that the perpetrator left behind valuables, including money, suggests that the motive behind the crime was not financial gain, but rather something else. Forensic analysis revealed that the likely weapons used in the crime were an AR-15 rifle and a 9mm Ruger pistol. Despite questioning over 100 individuals and collecting DNA samples from several dozen potential suspects, the investigation had stalled. More than a year and a half after the crime, Agent Randy Upton of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation took over the case in the fall of 1996. Randy adopted a new approach, shifting his focus from identifying the perpetrator to locating the weapon used in the crime. He visited the largest gun store in Macon and requested a list of customers who had purchased an AR-15 rifle between 1985 and 1995. Investigator Randy started contacting individuals on the list of 108 potential suspects. He explained to them that cooperating by allowing their weapon to be inspected and providing a DNA sample would greatly aid the investigation. Most of the people Randy spoke with agreed to comply, which led to the experts conducting further tests. As a result, the list of suspects began to dwindle. On November 27, 1996, Randy contacted Andrew Allen Cook, a 22-year-old who was on the list. During their conversation, Randy informed Andrew of the purpose of the call and asked permission to examine his rifle. However, Andrew claimed he no longer owned the rifle, stating that he had sold it in April 1994, nearly a year before the victims, Grant and Michele, died. Nonetheless, gun store records showed that this was not possible, as Andrew had actually purchased the rifle in August 1994. Agent Randy became suspicious when Andrew lied to him. When Randy asked Andrew for a DNA sample, Andrew claimed he needed to discuss it with his father, simultaneously an FBI agent, before complying. Instead, Andrew hung up. This evasive behavior made Randy think that Andrew might be the person he was searching for. Investigations revealed that 5 months after Grant and Michele's murders in 1995, Andrew pawned his rifle at a local gun store. Additionally, in December 1993, someone had bought a Ruger pistol on Andrew's behalf because he was underage at the time. Andrews sold this pistol to a friend in July 1995, shortly after pawning his rifle. This sequence of events suggested that Andrew's decision to get rid of both his rifle and pistol within 6 months of the murders was unlikely to be a coincidence. As the police gathered more information about Andrew, they became increasingly confident that they were on the right track. Further investigation revealed that Andrew had not only disposed of his firearms but also his 1987 Honda CRX, which matched the description of a car seen near the crime scene. Agent Randy decided to visit the diaper factory where Andrew worked. Although Andrew was absent, Randy spoke with one of his co-workers. A colleague of Andrew's reported that they had recently discussed the worst things they had ever done, and Andrew claimed to have shot someone with a rifle. The colleague was skeptical but asked Andrew why he had done it, and Andrew replied that he wanted to see if he could get away with it. The colleague also mentioned that Andrew was a frequent user of chewing tobacco. Another friend testified that Andrew had told him in late November 1996 that he needed to leave town because things were getting hot. These coincidences caught the attention of Agent Randy, who began searching for Andrew Cook, who had not lived with his parents for several years. On December 4, 1996, Agent Randy met with Andrew's father, John, who was also an FBI agent with 29 years of experience. Agent Randy explained that he was investigating the crime at Juliet Lake and wanted to speak with Andrew, but couldn't find him. John was familiar with the case of Grant and Michele from the news, but had not been involved in the investigation. He told Agent Randy that he didn't consider Andrew a suspect, but promised to find him and talk to him. Later that day, John was able to reach Andrew by phone. John Cook's world was turned upside down when his son, Andrew, revealed a shocking truth. A detective had been searching for Andrew in connection with a crime at Juliet Lake, and John had asked his son if he knew anything about it. Andrew's response was devastating. "Daddy, I'm not telling you. You're one of them, you're a cop." John's next question was laced with hope that his son would deny any involvement. "Were you the one who did the shooting?" he asked. After a brief pause, Andrew confirmed his worst fears, saying yes. Andrew explained that he had been fishing at Juliet Lake on the night of the incident. A couple had arrived, and he had gotten into an argument with the driver, Grant. According to Andrew, Grant had threatened him with a pistol, prompting Andrew to grab his rifle and commit an irreversible act. John urged his son to turn himself in to the authorities, but Andrew refused, saying he would rather disappear. John was stunned by his son's confession, but he maintained his professional composure. The next day, he visited the Monroe County Sheriff's Office and reported his son's confession. At the time, no one was aware that Andrew had been arrested earlier that morning in a nearby county for illegally hunting deer in Turkey. He had given a false name, but his true identity was quickly discovered by Agent Randy. Randy then traveled to Jones County to speak with Andrew. Unbeknownst to Randy, Andrew had already confessed everything to his father the day before. When Randy arrived at the Jones County Sheriff's Office, he introduced himself and asked Andrew if he would be willing to answer a few questions. Andrew responded, "It's been 2 years, and you still don't have any evidence. I used to own a Honda, a rifle, and a Ruger, but now you're just trying to frame me." Andrew told the sheriff that if they helped his father get a lawyer, he would reveal the entire truth. After being transferred to Monroe County, Andrew's father, John, was allowed a private conversation with him. When John hugged his son, both men broke down in tears. Andrew confessed to his father that he wasn't at the lake to fish on the night of the crime. Instead, he claimed to have arrived after the victims, Grant and Michele, were already there. Andrew's story went that he had fired multiple shots from his rifle, then used his pistol to fire additional shots. He then pulled Michele's body out of the car in an attempt to mislead the police. As an extra precaution, Andrew spat on Michele to prevent the police from linking him to the crime through saliva analysis. Andrew was subsequently charged with the murders of Grant Hendrickson and Michele Cartagena. The police gathered additional evidence to support his confession, including tracing the ownership of the rifle and pistol used in the crime. Forensic examination of the guns confirmed that they were indeed the ones used to kill Michele and Grant. Andrew Cook's DNA was matched to the saliva found on Michele's body, further implicating him in the crime. The trial took place in 1998, during which John Andrew, Andrew's father, spoke and apologized to the families of the victims, Grant and Michele. He acknowledged that his apologies would not bring them peace and expressed regret for not recognizing the evil that had consumed his son. Andrew Cook was found guilty on March 19, 1998, and was sentenced to death. He exhausted all his appeals, and the execution was scheduled for February 22, 2013. However, 3 days before the scheduled execution, Andrew's attorneys filed a clemency appeal, arguing that he was mentally unstable and required treatment. The State Board of Pardons and Paroles considered the appeal but ultimately voted against clemency. On February 22, 2013, Andrew Cook's family visited him in prison to bid their final farewell. Before his execution, he was granted the opportunity to choose his last meal, which consisted of a steak, baked potatoes, fried shrimp, lemon pie, and soda. As he lay strapped to a gurney in the death chamber, Andrew delivered his final words, expressing remorse for his actions. "I'm sorry," he said. "I won't ask you to forgive me, as I struggle to forgive myself." He then thanked his family for their unwavering support and apologized for the pain he had caused them, stating, "I'm sorry I took so much from you all." At 11:08 p.m., the lethal injection was administered. 14 minutes later, Andrew Cook, 38, was pronounced dead. Following the execution, Mary Hendrickson, the mother of one of the victims, expressed relief that justice had finally been served after 18 long years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Susan Wright. Susan Lucille Wright was born on April 24, 1976, in Houston, Texas, to parents Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Wright. She was the eldest of 2 children and had a biological sister named Cindy. As a child, Susan was active, sociable, and creatively talented. During her school years, she developed a passion for dancing and aspired to become a choreographer. With her bright and attractive appearance, as well as her slender figure, she drew many admirers and being the center of attention. After completing high school, Susan tried but was unsuccessful in getting into college. To raise funds for her future education, she decided to take some time off. During this period, she found work as a dancer at a well-known nightclub, performing partially nude on stage. She decided to leave her job and use her savings to enroll in evening courses at a nursing school. To support herself and maintain her independence, Susan took a job as a waitress at a restaurant while pursuing her studies. However, she soon discovered that medicine was not her real passion and had trouble paying for her studies. Consequently, she stopped attending her classes to concentrate on her job. In the summer of 1997, 21-year-old Susan met her future husband, Jeffrey Andrew Wright, at the Galveston restaurant where she worked. He was immediately drawn to her beauty and radiant smile, becoming a regular customer and leaving generous tips. After some time, Jeffrey mustered the courage to ask Susan for her phone number. He would call her daily, sometimes multiple times a day, to arrange romantic dates and surprise her with small gestures, such as sending flowers with heartfelt notes to her workplace. In the evenings, he would meet her and walk her home. The man was 8 years older than Susan, but she didn't consider this a significant issue. He was charming, attentive, and caring, which quickly won her over. However, it soon became apparent that Jeffrey struggled with alcohol and substance abuse. He claimed to have overcome his addiction to drugs and promised to quit drinking entirely. Susan, being young and in love for the first time, believed him. She thought that their love could conquer any obstacle. Shortly after, Susan discovered she was pregnant and excitedly shared the news with Jeffrey. Although he seemed pleased about becoming a father, he didn't take any decisive action, such as proposing or suggesting they move in together. Confused by Jeffrey's behavior, Susan took matters into her own hands. She insisted that their child should be born within a married family, and Jeffrey agreed to her terms. By the time they officially got married, Susan was already 8 months pregnant. They chose to have a quiet, intimate wedding without guests or celebrations, rather than a grand ceremony. Around this time, they purchased a home in a quiet area of Harris County, Texas, and moved in a couple of weeks before the birth of their child. In December 1998, they welcomed their first child, a son named Bradley, and appeared to be the perfect family. In 2001, Susan became pregnant again, and in the spring of 2002, she gave birth to a daughter named Kay. The family had a small dog named Buck, a comfortable family car. Jeffrey worked at a local construction company, and after the children were born, Susan became a stay-at-home mom by mutual agreement. She took care of the kids and created a cozy home environment. The neighbors said that Mrs. Susan was a kind person, friendly, sociable, a caring mother, and a loving wife. However, it was later revealed that the reality of their family life was far from perfect. Her husband was extremely demanding in every aspect of their lives. Susan's days were filled with cleaning, doing laundry, and cooking. Jeffrey demanded freshly cooked meals every day, prohibiting her from preparing meals in advance or reheating leftovers. Maintaining a perfect and clean home was a challenging task, especially with 2 small children. Additionally, Jeffrey required his clothes to be washed almost daily, as he refused to wear the same item twice. If Susan failed to meet these expectations, she faced insults, humiliation, and even physical abuse. Moreover, Jeffrey was extremely frugal, providing Susan with a meager weekly allowance of $100 to cover all household expenses, including cooking, childcare, and maintenance. Susan had to keep track of every expense, giving receipts to her husband Jeffrey. However, Jeffrey's behavior was a bigger issue. Despite promising to quit drinking, he continued and started using drugs, downplaying it as light doping for work stress. The substances made him aggressive, causing him to harm Susan and their son. Jeffrey denied his behavior was a problem, claiming Susan knew about his substance use before marriage. His parents sympathized with Susan but felt powerless to intervene. After moving in together, Jeffrey's behavior became increasingly aggressive, leading to physical, emotional, and intimate abuse. He initially apologized, but the violence became regular. Jeffrey would often go to the gym 3 times a week to practice boxing as a stress relief measure. He looked forward to sharing this activity with his son when the boy was older. On January 13, 2003, Jeffrey returned home from the gym agitated and on edge. As Susan prepared dinner, he attempted to teach their 5-year-old son some boxing moves but lost control and struck the child, causing the boy to burst into tears. Susan pretended not to notice the incident, but it was the last straw for her. Following dinner, she put the kids to bed. Meanwhile, Jeffrey stayed in the bedroom, where he continued to take drugs. There are different accounts of what happened next. According to Susan, when she went into the room, Jeffrey assaulted her, attempted to rape her, and tried to stab her with a knife. She claimed she fought back in self-defense after managing to take the knife from him. The events that followed are unclear, with different accounts of what happened. According to Susan, when she entered the bedroom, Jeffrey tried to attack her, sexually assault her, and kill her with a knife. However, she claimed she managed to grab the knife and defended herself, leading to a fight. Her story changed multiple times, but the version told in court, based on the investigation, was considered more believable. Susan decided to use her dance skills to distract her husband and lower his guard. Wearing a short silk robe over her bare body, she put on a seductive show for Jeffrey. She then suggested a role-playing game that involved tying him up, which he agreed to. Using 3 of Jeffrey's neckties, she bound his hands and one leg to the bed. She used the silk belt from her robe to secure his other leg. With Jeffrey immobilized, Susan created a makeshift gag using her underwear, pretending it was part of the intimate game. To set the mood, she lit candles and turned off the lights. Jeffrey was tied to the bed with a gag in his mouth, unable to move or speak. The room was dimly lit. Jeffrey poured hot wax from a candle onto Jeffrey's chest, which was painful but initially seemed like part of a game they were playing. However, when she poured wax onto his genital area, the pain became unbearable. Jeffrey tried to free himself and scream, but he couldn't. His wife, Susan, took a small sharp knife from the kitchen and began stabbing him repeatedly, starting at his groin and moving up his body, slashing his genitals, legs, abdomen, chest, arms, neck, and face. She began slowly, expressing her grievances with each stab, recounting the insults, humiliations, and abuse she had suffered. As she continued, Susan began to cry and stab faster. Experts later counted 193 shallow knife wounds on Jeffrey's body. Most of these wounds were not fatal, and Jeffrey was conscious for most of the ordeal. Susan's actions suggested she was in a state of extreme emotional distress. Her lawyers argued that she was in a state of affect, unable to stop even when Jeffrey showed no signs of life. She had not considered what she would do next or how she would handle the body. Shallow grave in the backyard. She sat next to her husband's body on the floor for hours. Eventually, she looked around the blood-covered bedroom and knew she had to act before dawn. She carefully checked outside through the window, ensuring the coast was clear. Her gaze landed on a shallow pit in the backyard that Jeffrey had dug for a fountain over the weekend. A plan formed instantly. This pit would become her despised husband's grave. To move the body, Susan used a garden wheelbarrow. This raised questions for investigators, as a petite woman was able to single-handedly lift and transport a man twice her weight out of the house. Suspicions of an accomplice arose but were never confirmed. Under the cover of darkness, Susan discreetly relocated the body to the pit and covered it with a thin layer of soil. She then cleaned up, removing the blood-stained curtains and bed linen, placing them in trash bags and dispersing them in different bins. The blood-soaked mattress was flipped over, as Susan was unsure how to properly clean it. She spent the remaining time until dawn scrubbing blood from the floor, walls, and carpet. Scrubbing the carpet is a big deal, with a large stain that couldn't be removed. In an attempt to eliminate any evidence of the violent confrontation, Susan applied bleach to the affected area, hoping the chemicals would destroy any remaining traces. Susan made a distressing call to her husband's parents in Austin, Texas. She was emotional as she recounted the events. Her husband, under the influence, had physically assaulted her and their son, spilled bleach on the carpet, and then ended their relationship before leaving. Jeffrey's parents were shocked and concerned by the news. Although they were aware that their son had his flaws, they felt genuine sympathy for their daughter-in-law. However, when they learned that he had hit their grandchild, they immediately offered for Susan and the children to come and stay with them. Despite their willingness to help, the young mother declined their offer. She added that she planned to file a police report and reveal all the incidents that had occurred at their residence. 2 days later, Susan visited the police station as her husband's sudden disappearance raised increasing concerns and action was necessary. Susan reported that she and her children had been victims of domestic violence perpetrated by her husband and required protection. She successfully obtained a restraining order against her husband, preventing him from approaching her and the children, although she was already aware that he would never be able to come near them again. As evidence, Susan presented bruises and cuts on her arms, which she alleged were inflicted by her husband using keys when she attempted to defend herself. Additionally, Susan had a small bruise on his face and corroborated that his father had struck him. At first, the tearful woman's story seemed believable and logical. She claimed her husband, under the influence of alcohol and substances, had attacked her and their young son. Then, Realizing what he had done, he became scared and fled. However, over time, suspicions grew because Jeffrey had not contacted anyone. He appeared to have run away without his belongings, documents, or mobile phone. He didn't show up for work or visit his parents, and none of his friends or neighbors had seen him. It was as if he had vanished. Susan found it unbearable to stay in the house where she confronted her husband. She couldn't shake the feeling he was still alive and would rise for revenge. She was losing her grip on reality. Even their dog Buck sensed it, constantly barking and trying to dig up the yard where Jeffrey was buried. On January 17th, Susan went to her mother's house with her children. When her mother saw her daughter in person, she fully realized the severity of the situation. Even though she had already been aware of it, Velma directly asked if she had killed her husband, and her daughter broke down in tears, nodding in admission. The daughter then confessed to the crime, revealing the location of her husband's body, and repeatedly expressed uncertainty about what to do next. Following her mother's advice, Susan reached out to lawyer Neil Davis the next day and confessed to killing her husband and attempting to cover up the crime. After gathering all the details, the experienced defense attorney considered possible scenarios and contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office on January 19th. Davis reported Susan's confession, including the burial of her husband's body in their backyard, and stated that she was willing to provide a full statement at the police station. On January 24, 2003, Susan voluntarily went to the police station, intent on making a full confession. However, her account was disjointed, with confusing details and occasional contradictions. She sometimes referred to her late husband as if he were still alive, expressed fear of him, and requested protection. Consequently, Susan underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The results revealed she had suffered a nervous breakdown and was experiencing depression. Despite this, the evaluation found that Susan was still capable of understanding the actions she had taken. When investigators uncovered the remains of Jeffrey from the makeshift grave in the backyard, they were shocked by the brutality of the scene, having never encountered. Experts counted a total of 193 knife wounds on the victim's body, distributed across various areas, including the groin, legs, shoulders, arms, abdominal area, chest, neck, and face. The majority of these wounds were superficial, meaning they were not life-threatening on their own. However, one head wound was severe enough to have caused death. The large number of superficial wounds suggests that the victim endured a prolonged and agonizing death, likely while still conscious, as his wife repeatedly stabbed him with a small knife. The victim's wrists and ankles showed deep marks from the ties and belt used to bind him. These injuries indicated that the victim had attempted to free himself but was unsuccessful. The ties and belt were still on the body when it was found. Additionally, there were traces of candle wax on the victim's chest and groin area. Susan claimed that the candle wax was an accident, resulting from her husband knocking over a lit candle. However, the prosecution argued that the hot wax was more likely used as a form of torture to inflict suffering on the bound victim. Furthermore, the victim's mouth contained his wife's underwear, which acted as a gag to prevent him from screaming or calling for help. Toxicological tests showed the deceased had alcohol and several controlled substances in his system, which could have led to aggressive and irrational behavior. Initially, the bedroom where the confrontation occurred seemed normal, except for a large bleach stain on the carpet. However, upon closer inspection using special chemical agents and equipment, it became clear that Susan had spent considerable time cleaning up the scene. Once wiped away blood traces were revealed, the true extent of the violence became apparent. Blood was found throughout the room, including on the ceiling, and the mattress was saturated with it. The trial began in late February 2004, with Susan having already spent a year in custody. Her children were being cared for by her parents and sister Cindy. Her lawyer was well prepared, having worked extensively with Susan to build her case. During the trial, Susan frequently broke down in tears as she recounted the events of that horrific night and the abuse she suffered leading up to it. She claimed to have endured years of cruelty and violence at the hands of her husband. The defendant, Susan, claimed that on the evening of the incident, her husband returned home from training in an agitated state. He began demonstrating boxing techniques to their 5-year-old son, Bradley, and said the boy would also take up boxing. When Bradley refused, his father hit him in the face. Susan put the children to bed and then tried to have a serious talk with her husband, urging him to seek help at a clinic. However, he became angry, grabbed his keys, and tried to leave. Susan attempted to stop him, which led to a struggle that caused injuries to her palms and wrists. According to Susan, her husband then struck her, causing her to fall and momentarily lose her bearings. After regaining composure, Susan saw her husband Jeffrey holding a knife, but her testimony became inconsistent. Her lawyer argued she was in a state of affect, leading her to seize the knife and strike Jeffrey. Susan claimed she secured him to a cart with ties and a belt after the confrontation, and candle wax accidentally landed on his body. However, the defendant had no explanation for why her underwear was found in the victim's mouth. In contrast, the prosecution presented a more convincing and logical case. Expert testimony revealed that the victim's wrist and ankle wounds were inflicted before death, likely as part of a ruse to restrain the victim. This also provided a plausible explanation for the gag in the victim's mouth. Additionally, the angle of the injuries suggested that the perpetrator was positioned on top of the victim, rather than struggling with him, which would have resulted in different injury patterns. All the cuts on the victim were inflicted from the front, indicating that the attack occurred while he was lying on his back, unable to move. It was unclear whether Susan had planned her husband's murder in advance and intentionally used the pit he dug for a fountain as a makeshift grave. Prosecutors, however, suspected that she had carefully orchestrated the crime, motivated by the potential insurance payout. The case drew widespread media attention, with Susan being labeled the blue-eyed butcher or blonde meat grinder by the press. Jeffrey's family demanded the harshest possible sentence, while many of their neighbors felt sorry for Susan, recalling instances where she had bruises that she attributed to her own clumsiness, but which may have been signs of physical abuse. Prosecutors initially sought a life sentence for Susan, but later reduced their request to 45 years in prison. In March 2004, she was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years. She showed no emotion when the judge delivered the verdict, appearing detached from the proceedings. A year later, her lawyer's attempt to appeal the decision was rejected. In 2008, Susan and her defense team filed another appeal, which was influenced by new testimony from a previously unknown witness. Misty Michele, wife of former NFL champion Steve Michele, was a key witness. She had a lengthy relationship with Jeffrey Wright in the mid-1990s and was briefly engaged to him. However, she suffered physical abuse, humiliation, and cruel treatment from Jeffrey, leading her to end the engagement and cut ties. Following this new information in Jeffrey's testimony, Susan's prison sentence was reduced to 20 years. She became eligible for parole in 2014 at age 38 but was denied. A second denial followed in July 2017. After 16 years in prison, Susan Wright was released in the winter of 2020 at age 44. She was met by reporters and photographers, causing her to break down in tears and asked to be left alone. Her trial received extensive media coverage, including a broadcast on court. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ayla Reynolds. Ayla Reynolds was born in Waterville, Maine on April 4, 2010. A beautiful girl with blonde hair, blue eyes and a captivating smile, she adored music and dancing. Her parents, Trista Reynolds and Justin Dietro, had a brief romance in 2009, leading to Trista's pregnancy. Though initially surprised, Justin's resemblance to Ayla was undeniable. A paternity test in 2010 made him accept his parenthood. Consequently, in December, he was ordered to provide child support. Trista and Justin didn't have a custody agreement, but Trista, who lived in Portland, had primary custody of Ayla, thanks to an arrangement between them. Only in mid-2011, after Ayla's first birthday, did Justin start having visits with her. He lived an hour and a half away, and the encounters were during the day and very brief. They agreed he could occasionally take Ayla with him, but never overnight. After giving birth to Ayla, Trista became pregnant again with her fiancé Raymond's child. In 2011, Ayla welcomed a baby brother, Raymond Jr. However, Trista's life took a dramatic turn on October 13, 2011, when she had a run-in with Child Services. They issued her an ultimatum: get substance abuse treatment or risk losing custody of her children. Trista opted for rehab, leaving Ayla and Raymond Jr. in the care of her mom and sister, determined to reunite with them and avoid losing them permanently. By October 2011, Justin had met with Ayla around 5 to 10 times. However, just 4 days after Trista's funeral, on October 17th, Justin and his family suddenly decided to seek custody of Ayla. Justin's mother, Phoebe DePetro, got in touch with Child Protective Services and was granted permission to take Ayla into their care. The authorities quickly informed Trista's relatives of their decision. However, when Ayla's aunt was told she had to hand Ayla over, she strongly opposed the decision, alleging that Justin had a history of abusing the child. The officials countered that a father's custody rights take precedence over those of an aunt. Once permission was granted, Justin and his family went to pick up Ayla from her Aunt Jessica's house, but they didn't know the address. Child protection officials provided the location, and a police officer, Charles Weaver, accompanied Justin and his mother to the house. The paternal grandmother waited in the car while Justin and the officer went to the door. When they arrived, Jessica begged the officer not to take Ayla away and warned that she wouldn't give her up willingly. The officer noted that Ayla seemed happy and carefree at first, laughing and playing. However, Jessica pointed out that Ayla's behavior changed dramatically when Justin approached. As soon as Ayla saw her father, she burst into tears and tried to get away from him. Despite this, the officer took Ayla from Jessica and handed her over to Justin. The child struggled and screamed, even trying to bite the officer when she was placed in her father's arms. Jessica told Officer Charles that Ayla was terrified of Justin and that they couldn't take her away from her. Charles explained that he sympathized, but as a police officer, he had to enforce the directive from Child Services, and it wasn't his decision to make. To clarify, if Justin had wanted primary physical custody of Ayla, he would have needed to either reach an agreement with her mother or go through a court process to get a judge's approval. However, as we saw in the custody exchange, there was no agreement or court involvement. Instead, a Child Protective Services supervisor made a judgment, but failed to consider the mother's own arrangements for the child to stay with her relatives during her temporary absence. Before a court grants a parent exclusive physical custody, they typically evaluate the situation thoroughly, including background checks and home visits, which did not happen in Ayla's case. In custody cases, the child's best interest should always come first. However, there was reportedly no evidence to support the decision that was made. Many analysts believe that only an imminent danger to the child's safety could outweigh the stability and continuity of staying with her maternal relatives. If Child Protective Services officials believed Ayla was at risk, it's unclear why they only removed Ayla and not her little brother Raymond as well. The father took Ayla to his childhood home in Waterville, where he lived with his mother Phoebe, 47, his sister Alicia, 24, and her baby daughter Gabriella, who like Ayla was an infant at the time. Justin, 25, lived in the partially finished basement, a single large room, while the rest of the family occupied the upstairs area. During Trista's rehabilitation, she called Justin every day to speak with Ayla and ensure everything was going smoothly. She did not perceive any warning signs during these conversations. On October 20th, 2011, coinciding with the 8th day of Trista's treatment, a meeting was held to discuss Ayla's case. Attendees included Child Protective Services members, 2 doctors, Trista, her sister Jessica, and their lawyer, as well as Justin, who participated via phone. This meeting resulted in an agreement that Ayla would be returned to her mother on October 22, 2011, upon Trista's completion of the addiction recovery program. It was also agreed that Justin would bring Ayla to the treatment center for a visit on the 21st. Things were going well for Trista, but the situation was about to take a turn. None of the established agreements were fulfilled, leaving Trista desperate to regain custody of her daughter. She repeatedly reached out to Child Protective Services for assistance in enforcing the agreement, but to no avail. As a result, Trista sought a temporary compromise with Justin. He would continue to care for the child, and she would receive regular visitation rights. On November 12, 2011, Justin took the girl to the emergency room. Following a thorough examination, doctors diagnosed a broken bone in one of her joints, specifically the elbow joint that connects the upper arm to the elbow. Justin claimed the accident had occurred the previous night, on November 11th, stating that he slipped and fell on her while holding Ayla on the porch during a rainstorm. According to him, although she cried, there were no visible injuries, and it wasn't until the next morning that it became apparent she required urgent medical attention. By the next Monday, the orthopedist concluded that surgery would not be necessary, and the injury would likely heal on its own. A week later, on November 26th, the specialist reported during the 3rd medical appointment that the child's progress was as expected. Trista attended this medical consultation to closely monitor her daughter's recovery, unaware that it would be the last time she would hold her in her arms. From that point on, the situation quickly deteriorated. Frustrated by the ongoing disputes over custody, visitation rights, and even her right to talk to her daughter on the phone, Trista decided to take action. On December 15, 2011, she filed court papers to initiate legal proceedings to gain full physical custody of Ayla. On Saturday, December 17th, 2 days later, Justin contacted the police in the morning to report that Ayla was missing from his mother's house, where he was living with his girlfriend Courtney Roberts and his sister Alicia. According to him, they had put the 20-month-old girl to bed the previous night, and when they woke up early that morning, she was no longer there. Trista was on her way to visit her boyfriend Raymond in a coastal city in Maine, just 50 miles from the Canadian border, when she received devastating news. She was dozing in the passenger seat while her father-in-law, Robert, drove. Robert took a call from Trista's father, who informed him that Trista's baby, Ayla, was missing. The news left Robert frozen, and he searched for a safe place to stop the car and wake Trista. Groggy, Trista listened as her father's voice came through the phone, informing her that her baby's whereabouts were unknown. Desperate, Trista changed course, heading to meet the police who were searching for Ayla. The 90-minute journey felt like an eternity to Trista, who frantically called Justin to find out what had happened, but her calls went unanswered, leaving her terrified. When they arrived at the police station, both Trista and Robert gave statements to the authorities. About 30 minutes later, Trista's father joined them, visibly angry and distressed. It turned out that Justin had called 911 that morning at 8:49 to report Ayla's disappearance. He claimed the last time someone saw Ayla was around 10 p.m. the previous night, when his sister Alicia checked on her before bed. However, on Saturday morning, they discovered Ayla was no longer in her crib, but Justin didn't specify the exact time of her disappearance in the call. Justin suspected that an unknown intruder had kidnapped the toddler. The news of Ayla's disappearance spread rapidly, and the authorities quickly launched an investigation. The police chief addressed the media, assuring them that the case was being thoroughly investigated and that their primary objective was to find Ayla by any means. The police searched the house for any potential clues that could lead them to Ayla, facilitating their operation. Meanwhile, the family stayed with friends, and a command center was set up to coordinate the search efforts. On the third day, Monday, December 19th, the FBI was requested to assist in the search operation. By this point, 75 individuals from various agencies were involved in the efforts. The state police seized 2 vehicles from the Petro residence, a 1996 Ford Explorer, owned by Justin, and a 4-door silver sedan, owned by Justin's girlfriend Courtney, who was present on the night of Ayla's disappearance. The search for Ayla expanded with the FBI's child abduction team conducting door-to-door interviews. 75 officers worked tirelessly, investing 5,000 hours in 10 days, pursuing 330 leads. 50 civilian volunteers and a $30,000 reward aided the effort. Justin initially kept a low profile, avoiding media. However, he made more public appearances, including on the Today's Show, where he addressed the shift in law enforcement's message. He appealed to the perpetrator to return Ayla, emphasizing they had no right to keep her, and she needed to be with her family at home. Justin attributed his delayed cooperation to his initial naivety, having expected Ayla to return within a few weeks. He also stated that law enforcement had advised him to avoid the press, which was partially confirmed by the Department of Public Safety spokesperson. However, the spokesperson clarified that this guidance was only provided at the beginning of the investigation. Subsequently, the police actually encouraged Ayla's parents to remain in the public eye. Justin took the opportunity to respond to the insinuations against him, inviting the TV host to spend a day with him to gain first-hand experience of his situation. While he praised the police's efforts, he acknowledged that some of their methods were unpleasant. He emphasized that the truth remains the same, regardless of how many times he was asked the same questions and accused of lying, believing that the truth will eventually emerge. By the end of January, police discovered Ayla's blood in several areas of the DPO house and announced their findings. Although there was not enough evidence to make arrests, 3 adults, including Justin, Courtney, and Elisha, who lived in the residence where Ayla was last seen, were suspects. According to Stephen McCausland, spokesperson for the Department of Public Safety, the forensic evidence contradicted the family's story of what happened, making it highly unlikely that someone could have taken Ayla from her bedroom without one of the 3 adults in the house noticing. 6 months after Ayla's disappearance was reported on May 30th, 2012, the police announced that it was unlikely the little girl was still alive. Trista's family invited journalists into their home to watch the press conference where this news was delivered. Trista broke down in tears, and her grief soon turned to anger as she accused Justin of killing her baby. For Trista's family, learning the details of forensic tests conducted at Justin's family's house was extremely difficult. They already knew that Ayla's blood had been found, and they had been told the amount was equivalent to 25% of her blood volume. However, they had not seen the evidence until January 2013, when everything was finally revealed to them. The investigation uncovered disturbing evidence. The baby seat in Justin's 1996 Ford Explorer had Ayla's blood on the left shoulder strap. Dried gastric fluid was found on the back seats. In Ayla's bedroom, blood was discovered on her princess pink sneakers next to her crib, as well as on the face and arms of her doll. Investigators believed Ayla might have tried to wipe blood from her mouth with her toy. Additionally, a blood stain was found on the living room sofa. Most of the blood traces were found in the basement. On the mattress where Justin slept with Courtney, a pool of Ayla's blood was discovered. Nearby on the bed, vomit and an unidentified pink fiber, possibly from a toy, were found next to the sneakers stained with Ayla's blood on the tongue and inside. Additionally, splashes of blood were found on the cement floor around the bed and on the walls, with some of the splashes on the walls matching Ayla's height. An expert concluded that some of the blood drops, about the size of a dime, were indicative of trauma caused by a blunt object. The experts also determined that some blood spatter patterns in the house might have been coughed up by Ayla, suggesting that she had both internal and external injuries. The police found that bed linens had been used to clean up Ayla's blood. This information was horrific for Trista and her family to learn, and they soon discovered even more disturbing details. Officers warned Trista about disturbing evidence, then showed her luminol test results revealing hidden bloodstains at her house. She was devastated, fled the station in panic, and became convinced Ayla was murdered, declining to see more evidence. Justin showed no emotion when police showed him and the Petro family evidence months prior. The family they stayed with during the relocation also declined to see photos, citing disinterest. Justin's girlfriend, who was with him the night Ayla disappeared, had the same indifferent reaction to the findings. Trista spoke out 8 months after the 2013 ordeal, slam-dunking Justin, Alicia, and Courtney for being free and unbothered. In a blistering letter, she shared evidence and photos, refusing to wait for justice, vowing to revive public interest with or without law enforcement's backing. In 2016, journalists visited Justin's mom's house, meeting Alicia, Ayla's aunt. Queried about blood evidence, Alicia blamed Ayla's lactose intolerance, citing vomiting. However, internet research showed this was unlikely, as typical symptoms are gas, bloating, and diarrhea, not vomiting blood. In 2017, a judge granted Trista's request and formally declared Ayla legally deceased. The ruling stated that Ayla's death likely occurred on or around December 17, 2011, the day her father, Justin, reported her missing. With this ruling in place, Trista and her legal team pursued a wrongful death lawsuit against Justin, alleging that his intentional and unlawful actions led to Ayla's death, and that he subjected her to pain, terror, and physical harm prior to her passing. Trista held a press conference, confronting her deceased daughter's father after he denied wrongdoing in a lawsuit. She questioned his conscience, saying she saw the truth in his eyes and believed he knew it was a problem. In 2023, a judge granted Trista's request to add Phoebe and Elisha as defendants in the wrongful death lawsuit. The 3 defendants now face civil charges for wrongful death, conscious pain and suffering, and unlawfully interfering with a deceased person's body. Additionally, Justin is charged with breaching his parental duty to care for a minor child. Trista and her lawyer knew they wouldn't get money from Justin. They wanted to uncover the truth about Ayla's disappearance. It was suspicious, with Justin driving to Portland and back, claiming to search for Ayla, but never contacting Trista or her family. He had bought a $25,000 life insurance policy for Ayla weeks before. It's bizarre that Justin stayed at a friend's house while detectives investigated Ayla's disappearance. This is especially surprising, given that Justin had barely been involved in his baby's life during the 9 months of pregnancy, and most of her life. Trista also shared that she received strange messages from Justin in the week after he took Ayla, in which he expressed fear that someone might kidnap or snatch her. He had made similar comments around December 11th, 6 days before her disappearance was reported. However, after Ayla went missing, those messages took on a threatening and confusing tone. Trista admitted that she had always been perplexed by their meaning. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rosanna Galliano. Rosanna Galliano was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in the late 1970s. She was the youngest child, with 2 older brothers, Oscar and Gustavo, and a sister, Monica. Her parents were Raldo and Graciela. While details of her childhood and teenage years are scarce, it's known that she finished high school in the late 1990s. During this time, her father, Raldo, worked as a mechanic. In early 2001, Jose Arce visited Raldo's workshop, where he met Rosanna. Born on November 22, 1948, Jose had spent over 30 years living abroad, including time in Greece and the United States, where he was imprisoned for 4 years for drug trafficking. He returned to Argentina in 1996. owning 8 properties in a posh area of Buenos Aires. Jose and Rosanna started dating quickly after meeting at her father's shop, where he brought his vintage car for repairs. Despite their significant age difference, Jose appeared financially stable, thanks to his mother Elsa, who still lived in the United States. When 52-year-old Jose proposed to 22-year-old Rosanna, her mother Graciela expressed concerns about their age difference. Jose argued that age was not an obstacle to love, and Graciela turned to Rosanna for reassurance. Rosanna confirmed her desire to marry him in a whisper. The couple got married on November 17, 2001, just 7 months after meeting. Jose attributed his cheerful, modern, and smart personality to winning Rosanna over. They soon had a son named Gono, but problems began to emerge soon after. Jose was a controlling and jealous partner who frequently belittled Rosanna and her family. The emotional abuse escalated into physical violence, leaving Rosanna feeling trapped and terrified. Jose's intimidating presence, reinforced by his possession of 2 guns, allowed him to maintain control, a situation that Rosanna's family was painfully aware of. He would often flaunt his guns when they had visitors, or when he visited others. On one occasion, Rosanna's brother Oscar witnessed Jose physically assaulting her while they were painting their house, telling her to shut up before hitting her. Another time, Rosanna's father noticed bruises on her back, and she revealed that Jose had dragged her across the pavement. Despite these challenges, Rosanna and Jose had their second child, and Rosanna tried to make the relationship work, hoping to provide a stable home for their children. However, her efforts were consistently thwarted by Jose's temper and disrespectful behavior. Moreover, Jose's mother Elsa exerted control over their household from a distance, making decisions about their lives during her brief visits to Argentina. By 2006, Rosanna had reached her breaking point after enduring years of unbearable abuse, and she finally found the courage to report Jose for domestic violence. Her family, however, remained largely oblivious to the full extent of her suffering. Months later, Rosanna filed a second complaint, which included a request for a medical examination to document her injuries. It was then that she confided in her sister Monica, and the two made a pact to stay in close contact, reaching out to each other whenever something happened. Monica became Rosanna's safe haven and primary source of support, providing a refuge from the unbearable realities of life with Jose. Rosanna would often visit Monica's apartment with her children, though Jose would dictate when they had to return, frequently backing up his demands with death threats. Rosanna made the difficult decision to move in with Monica and the children, leaving Jose to stay in his own home. After a period of time, Rosanna took further action by filing another complaint and seeking a divorce, which resulted in a restraining order being issued against Jose. From then on, the only times they met were during child visitation sessions at a neutral location in El Romanzo Exal de la Cruz, as arranged by the court. Rosanna confided in her neighbor, Daniel Gonzalez, a married father of one who worked as a gardener. Rumors began to circulate about a possible romantic relationship between Rosanna and Daniel, although this was never confirmed. Meanwhile, Jose's threats persisted, and Rosanna shared a chilling voicemail with her brother Oscar, in which Jose casually spoke about killing her in mid-2007 while socializing with friends at a bar. Rosanna met Oscar Lugo, a 32-year-old man from Marino who worked in a sewing workshop. They quickly became close, exchanging phone numbers and starting a romantic relationship. Oscar was an old-fashioned gentleman who treated Rosanna with kindness, attention, and listened to her, which was a welcome change after all the turmoil she had faced. By December 2007, Oscar had become a part of Rosanna's holiday celebrations, even dressing up as Santa Claus to delight her 2 sons. However, their happiness was threatened by Jose, who was keeping a close eye on Rosanna's every move and was aware of her new relationship. The looming divorce had panicked him. Jose tried to persuade Rosanna to end things with Oscar by offering her a truck, but she refused. When Rosanna had a severe nervous breakdown, it was Oscar who accompanied her to the hospital, not Jose. Running out of options, Jose, with the help of his mother Elsa, concocted a plan to hire a hitman whose identity remains unknown. On January 16, 2008, Rosanna and her sister Monica went to El Rano to pick up her sons, aged 4 and 3. However, Jose delayed the handover, making excuses. At 9:15 p.m., Jose called Rosanna, claiming that Geronimo had a fever and that he would take him to the hospital and return him the next day. But Rosanna insisted on taking care of Geronimo herself and asked for the children to be returned. The call was brief, and Rosanna then went back inside. Around 10 p.m., Rosanna sent Oscar Lugo a casual text about their plans for the next day. Later, at 10:50 p.m., Rosanna and Monica sat down for dinner when Jose called again, unleashing a deadly trap. Rosanna stepped out into the garden to improve the reception, but a shadowy figure emerged from behind the trees and shot her 4 times with a .45 caliber gun. Monica, hearing the shots, screamed as Rosanna staggered and fell. Panicked, Monica tried calling 911, but the call wouldn't go through. She then asked her boyfriend to alert the police. Meanwhile, Oscar Lugo, oblivious to the events, attempted to contact Rosanna at 11 p.m., but got no response. He then tried to reach Monica, but she didn't answer. The police investigation revealed that the shooter had entered from an adjacent vacant lot. A witness reported seeing someone fleeing through a gap in the fence, but couldn't provide a clear description due to the darkness. Jose was left stunned after being questioned and subsequently requested a lawyer to take over the proceedings before departing the following day. Meanwhile, a red sweater was discovered during further searches, which Rosanna's relatives identified as belonging to Jose, solidifying his position as the prime suspect in their minds. The case garnered widespread media attention, sending shockwaves throughout the country and sparking a scandal as Jose and his mother publicly proclaimed his innocence, while also making disparaging remarks about Rosanna and suggesting that her multiple lovers should be investigated instead. After the incident, Daniel the gardener became reclusive, shunning all human contact. On the night of Rosanna's funeral, Raldo observed Jose lurking in the distance, watching from his truck without offering condolences or joining the mourners. Jose's defense strategy later focused on discrediting Monica, Rosanna's sister, and the sole witness by raising questions about her behavior, such as why her clothes bore no blood stains and why she had prioritized calling for help over assisting her sister. However, this theory lacked credibility, and the investigators countered that the murder weapon was too heavy for a woman to wield. The detectives also highlighted a crucial point. Anyone familiar with the house would know that Rosanna had to venture outside to get a cell signal, suggesting a high degree of premeditation in the crime. During the investigation, Rosanna's sons were cared for by their father and grandmother Elsa, while their grandmother Graciela was granted limited access. In contrast, Monica and Oscar were denied access, with Jose citing safety concerns for his sons, despite the legal restrictions. The children longed to see their Aunt Monica, prompting Jose to occasionally allow supervised visits. Monica seized these opportunities to take the children to see a psychologist. Eventually, Graciela successfully obtained visitation rights, although she was denied guardianship. In a contemporaneous interview, Jose claimed that Rosanna had 4 lovers, all of whom had criminal records. According to Jose, Rosanna engaged in intimate relationships with these men to uncover their secrets, which she then leveraged to blackmail them for personal gain. Meanwhile, following threats, Oscar was placed under police protection as a protected witness in his sister's case, requiring him to wear a tracking bracelet. As 2007 drew to a close, investigators still lacked concrete evidence to bring charges against any of the suspects. However, a significant breakthrough came a year after the murder, when Jose was arrested in January 2008, charged with aggravated homicide due to their romantic relationship, premeditation, and the alleged involvement of multiple perpetrators. 4 years after the attack, Oscar exercised his visitation rights to take his nephews to play soccer, sharing a heartwarming hug with the 6- and 7-year-old boys. In April 2013, the trial commenced. Jose maintained his innocence during the May proceedings, but the trial was delayed when he suffered a stroke, ultimately pushing the final verdict to November 2013. The judges concluded that the murder was meticulously planned, bearing the hallmarks of organized crime. Jose and Elsa were found to have chosen the time and place for the attack, aware that a phone call would lure Rosanna outside, rendering her vulnerable. The court determined that financial motives drove the murder, as Jose sought to avoid splitting the marital assets. Jose and Elsa received life imprisonment sentences. The higher court upheld the conviction, citing Jose's threats, the domestic violence endured by Rosanna, and the dominant influence of his mother. The actual perpetrators of the shooting were never identified. In 2015, Jose and Elsa were placed under house arrest, with Jose's health and Elsa's age cited as reasons, allowing the children to reunite with them. The media continued to follow the children's story for years, during which Monica and Graciela had no contact with them. The boys were shuffled between homes familiar to their father, but unknown to Rosanna's family. In January 2017, the court granted the children a weekend visit with their maternal grandparents for the first time. The Galliano family prepared their home with fresh paint, a thorough cleaning, and decorations, and Graciela cooked their favorite dish. That weekend, the Galliano home was filled with joy as the boys played soccer, video games, and even asked to sleep in their grandmother's bed, whom they hadn't seen in over 2 years. On November 24, 2018, Jose passed away after another stroke. The event was another devastating blow for the children, who attended their father's funeral. During the funeral, they expressed their concerns about their future to their Aunt Monica, who reassured them with calmness and love, promising to support whatever they decided. They chose to live with Monica, who then had to confront Elsa to communicate the boys' decision. Through these and many other instances, it was clear that Monica always prioritized her nephew's wishes, whether they wanted to talk or preferred silence. Monica's primary goal was to provide stability and comfort for the boys. In March 2019, Jono decided against switching schools, opting to stay close to his friends and see out his final 2 years. He returned to live with his grandmother, Elsa. Meanwhile, Monica pursued custody of Nahuan. Things appeared to be settling, but tragedy struck in late November 2019 when 87-year-old Elsa was hospitalized and shortly after passed away on November 30th. The following month, Monica was awarded custody of Nahuan. By the end of the year, Jono had moved in with a family friend of his grandmother's. Both brothers still required psychological support to cope with their traumatic experiences, with Jono grappling with depression. Their psychologist acknowledged the staggering sequence of events they had endured. In March 2020, Jono's housemate passed away, prompting him to take refuge with his Aunt Monica until October of that year. When he turned 18, Geronimo rented a small apartment and began living independently, supported by the income generated from his inherited properties. Meanwhile, Monaco initiated legal proceedings to secure their inheritance, fearing they might be stripped of their assets. Nahuan, on the other hand, demonstrated emotional stability thanks to the support he received, and was encouraged to continue attending therapy as needed. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kate Waring. Kate Waring was born in Charleston, South Carolina, into a loving family with 2 siblings and parents who worked hard to provide the best possible life for their children. From a young age, Kate demonstrated a deep love for animals, which led her to volunteer at various animal shelters during her teenage years. Apart from her compassion for animals, Kate was also an accomplished dancer with a wide circle of friends and a radiant personality. To all appearances, Kate grew up in a supportive and nurturing environment, and in many ways, this was true. However, Kate's life took a dramatic turn just before she went off to college. In a private conversation with her parents, Kate revealed that she had been abused by someone close to the family when she was younger. Although she chose not to disclose the identity of the perpetrator, her revelation sent shockwaves through her family. Her parents were unaware of the trauma Kate had been silently enduring for years, leaving them reeling from the news. After sharing her dark secret, Kate's parents did everything in their power to support her, but the trauma's consequences only seemed to intensify over time. Initially, Kate struggled with addiction, first with alcohol and later with illegal substances. Her parents suggested therapy, which she reluctantly agreed to. They also encouraged her to move back home, hoping the family's presence would help her cope. Despite being an independent adult, Kate agreed to return home. At first, therapy seemed to be having a positive impact, but Kate struggled to break free from the past's heavy burden and live life to the fullest. The psychiatrist diagnosed her with depression, but everything changed when her father, always concerned and eager to help, suggested a trip to anywhere she desired. Kate was thrilled by the idea and soon set her heart on traveling beyond the Arctic Circle. Her dream was to witness polar bears in their natural habitat, and despite her traumatic experience, her love for animals remained unwavering. Kate and her parents searched for the perfect tour and soon purchased tickets for a trip to the Arctic Circle. Kate was thrilled to be embarking on this adventure, and as a result, her parents witnessed a significant transformation in her demeanor, replacing her depressive state with a cheerful and optimistic outlook. When they finally embarked on the trip, Kate was ecstatic. During the journey, Kate and her parents had a fantastic time on the boat, which took them to the Arctic Circle, where Kate befriended a Russian tourist. They remained in contact throughout the trip and continued exchanging letters afterward. Kate developed strong feelings for him, and eventually, after returning home, she decided to visit Russia. Upon arriving, they reunited, and she even contemplated staying longer in the country, but due to visa problems, Kate was forced to return home. Despite this setback, it seemed that Kate had finally overcome her depression. Back home, she planned to resolve her visa issues and even started writing a book for her children. Her life was finally taking a turn for the better. On Saturday, June 12, 2009, Kate's life took a dramatic turn. Her family was away on a business trip, leaving her alone at home. Normally, Kate would call her father to reassure him that everything was okay, but this time, she failed to do so. Her concerned father tried calling her back, but there was no response. Given Kate's past struggles with alcohol and substance abuse, he asked someone to check on her at home. When the person arrived, Kate was nowhere to be found, but her bedroom light was still on, suggesting she might return soon. However, she didn't show up. Furthermore, Kate had left behind her essential medication, which she was supposed to take regularly. Despite their growing anxiety, Kate's parents decided not to panic and waited for her return, considering her age of 28 and ability to take care of herself. Her father decided to wait until Monday before involving the police. On Monday morning, Kate Waring's father received a call from the bank. A bank employee informed him that someone had tried to cash a check worth more than $4,000, supposedly signed by Kate. However, the bank couldn't get in touch with Kate directly, and as her father was a co-signer on her account, they reached out to him instead. The situation seemed highly unusual because Kate's father was certain that his daughter only had a few $100s in her account, which is why the bank's security team contacted him. However, Kate's signature on the check appeared genuine. They also provided the name of the man who had brought in the check, Ethan Mack. The father did not recognize him, but since the bank authenticated Kate's signature, he assumed the man was an acquaintance of his daughter. Nevertheless, he decided to contact the police, as Kate remained unreachable. The detectives began investigating Kate's disappearance, and Ethan Mack was their first point of inquiry. He claimed to have known Kate for years and stated that she had written the check to settle old debts. According to Ethan, he frequently provided Kate with money for clothing, jewelry, and other purchases. conversations with Kate's friends revealed that she had been friends with Ethan for an extended period, although they indicated that their relationship had never been romantic in nature, despite being close. Ethan claimed that he and Kate met on Friday night and dined at a restaurant together. Afterwards, he drove her home and went about his own business. He even produced correspondence with Kate, which corroborated his account of their dinner. Ethan allowed the detectives to search his house, where he lived with his mother, as well as his car. Although the search yielded nothing suspicious, the police still found the situation surrounding the check to be peculiar and were not quick to dismiss him as a suspect. Ethan eventually called the police station, demanding to be left alone. The police worked to reconstruct the timeline of the Friday night Kate was last seen. She had met with her therapist that afternoon, followed by a trip to the gym. Later, she entered a store, purchasing a bottle of wine. Security cameras captured her on the phone at that time, possibly speaking with Ethan, who later picked her up and they headed to a restaurant. Kate's parents remembered another unsettling detail. On the day she vanished, Kate had mentioned having some problems, but refused to elaborate. Her parents didn't recall this conversation until days later. Unfortunately, this information didn't aid the search, as weeks passed and Kate remained missing. Her parents felt the police weren't doing enough, given Kate's troubled past. However, in August, the case gained new life when a group of former police officers, led by lawyer Andy Savage, took it up. This group had been privately investigating unresolved cases, and Kate Waring's case had caught their attention. The team of 5 individuals, all with extensive police experience, began investigating Kate's disappearance. Former detective James Randall was the first to examine Kate's bedroom, where he found 2 suspicious elements. The first was a packet of medication that Kate regularly took, which was concerning because her parents confirmed she would never intentionally stop taking it. Therefore, the fact that the packet was left at home was alarming. The second suspicious element was Chinese currency on Kate's bed, which was peculiar because her parents had no idea where she had obtained it or why she needed it. The team then involved Bobby Mitter, an expert in gathering online information about individuals and tracking them. His skills proved invaluable, and he quickly discovered that on the night of her disappearance, around 10 p.m., Kate had called her friend James, who did not answer the phone. Instead, she left him a very troubling voicemail, claiming someone had stolen her credit cards. The investigation also revealed that her phone was last active at 1:53 a.m., when for some reason, she called her own voicemail. Further investigation led team member Lewis to discover that the call was made from the area of James Island, which was a few kilometers from Kate's house. Another team member, former homicide detective Eugene Fraser, made an intriguing discovery. He spoke with several acquaintances living in James Island and found it odd that Ethan Mack, who had voluntarily let the police inspect his home, did not actually live there. Instead, he rented an apartment in a nearby building, which Eugene was fortunate to uncover because one of his acquaintances happened to be the landlord of the apartment Ethan had rented. Digging deeper, the detectives discovered that the police had barely scratched the surface in their investigation into Ethan. A cursory search of his mother's house was all they had done. The team decided to take matters into their own hands and uncovered a vital lead. Ethan had a girlfriend, Heather Camp. When they questioned Kate's parents about her, her mother recalled a peculiar encounter. Kate had met Heather on a train from Washington, D.C. about a month before her disappearance, when Kate was having issues with her Russian visa. Heather claimed her wallet had been stolen, leaving her penniless, and Kate sympathetically offered to lend her a substantial amount of money. Heather stated she had landed a pediatric surgeon position in South Carolina, set to start soon. Later, she announced her daughter had died in a New Jersey car crash, but her behavior was eerily calm, suggesting the news hadn't greatly affected her. The detectives also stumbled upon an intriguing fact. Heather was facing a fraud charge in Indiana for posing as a licensed doctor by falsifying documents. This new evidence forced them to re-examine the case from a different angle. They presented their findings to the police, but the authorities were surprisingly uncooperative and unwilling to continue the investigation. The team understood that the only way to get the police to take action was to gather irrefutable proof that linked Heather to Kate's disappearance. To achieve this, the team went to great lengths. They convinced the person who rented the apartment to Ethan Mack to install a secret camera outside his apartment door. Additionally, they placed a hidden GPS tracker in Ethan's car, enabling the team to track his movements and observe his activities. It didn't take long to yield results. After analyzing Ethan's travel patterns, the detectives found that he had visited numerous pawn shops across the city, selling small batches of various jewelry pieces. Although they couldn't confirm whether the jewelry belonged to Kate, the detectives believed they were getting close to a vital clue. After some time, Ethan and Heather faced a serious problem when their landlord threatened to evict them due to non-payment of rent. The team knew that if this happened, they would lose the opportunity to observe the couple's behavior and movements. To prevent this, they tried to persuade the landlord to change his mind. At the same time, the detectives quickly came up with a new plan. They asked the landlord to give Ethan and Heather more time to pay the rent, but only if they agreed to sign a contract promising to clear the debt. The strategy worked, and as soon as the landlord handed over the contract, the team sent it to the laboratory. The goal was to compare Ethan and Heather's handwriting on the contract with Kate's signature on the $4,000 check. This led to a significant breakthrough. The handwriting expert conclusively confirmed that the check signature was from the same person who had signed Heather's name on the contract, proving that Heather had forged Kate's signature. The team knew the police would be slow to act, so they came up with a new plan. They persuaded the landlord to cooperate and told Ethan that his apartment needed to be treated for insects. The team leader wore an exterminator suit and went to the apartment with the landlord. They waited until Ethan left the apartment, confirmed by his car moving away from the house, before entering. However, they were met with an unwelcome surprise. Ethan was still at home. It turned out Heather was driving his car, but it was too late to abort the operation. The investigator had to improvise, insisting that fumigation was necessary and asking Ethan to wait outside while the chemicals were sprayed. Ethan, none the wiser, agreed and left. Meanwhile, the investigator carefully searched the apartment for any evidence linking Ethan to Kate's disappearance. He searched Ethan's backpack and found Chinese money, the same notes found on Kate's bed. This was their first clue. Unfortunately, no other potential clues were found. The investigator and landlord pretended to finish the treatment and left. The team needed to regroup and devise another plan. Upon reviewing the footage from the camera in front of Ethan's apartment, detectives identified a frequent visitor, Terry Williams, a neighbor of the couple. They suspected Williams might have information about Ethan and Heather's involvement in Kate's disappearance, so they took a bold step. The team offered Williams a substantial sum of money in exchange for information about his friend's actions regarding Kate. They brought the money to Williams's apartment, but were met with an unexpected turn of events. At the time of the offer, Heather was at her home, where she overheard the entire conversation. Apparently, there was a prior discussion between Ethan and Williams. When the detective approached Williams, Heather panicked. She frantically called Ethan, explaining the situation. The investigation team was caught off guard and spent the following days struggling to determine their next move. In a shocking turn of events, Williams unexpectedly reached out to the detectives and asked them to come to his home to talk. When the detectives arrived at his apartment, Williams was surprisingly open and honest. He told them that although Ethan and Heather hadn't directly confided in him, he had had his suspicions about their involvement in Kate's disappearance. Williams then handed over an iPod he had received from Heather shortly after Kate went missing, which he had assumed belonged to Kate. The detectives analyzed the iPod and were able to trace its ownership to Kate using its serial number. This discovery provided the final piece of evidence needed to reopen the case. This time, the authorities couldn't ignore the evidence and finally arrested Ethan and Heather. During the initial interrogation, Heather agreed to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for a lighter sentence. She claimed Kate's body was located on Watala Island, approximately 20 miles from her residence. A police search team scoured the area all day, but failed to find Kate's body. It became apparent that Heather had deliberately misled them. Andy Savage decided to employ a new tactic. Recognizing that Heather was likely directly involved in Kate's murder, he met with her and promised to help. Andy offered her a deal. In exchange for revealing the exact location of Kate's body, he would assist in getting her off the forgery charges. Heather, believing it was her only chance, agreed. She provided a detailed description of the location, indicating that Kate's body was still on the outskirts of Watala Island. The detectives, minus the police, decided to investigate the location without alerting the authorities. However, they faced disappointment and did not find Kate's body. The next day, they returned and made a discovery. They found the remains of the young woman. Although the forensic doctors could not determine the cause of death, the perpetrator soon began to confess. In August 2009, Heather signed a confession for murder, obstruction of justice, and bank check forgery. It was discovered that she had been committing fraud for years and had targeted Kate as her next victim during a trip from Washington. Later, she met Ethan and began a relationship with him. Ethan's trial began in October 2010, during which the prosecution presented Heather's testimony to reconstruct the events surrounding Kate's disappearance. According to Heather, on the day Kate vanished, Kate discovered that Heather had deceived her and stolen her credit cards. Kate threatened to inform her father, which would likely lead to police involvement. Heather confided in Ethan, who sided with her despite his long-standing friendship with Kate. The investigation revealed that Kate was not alone with Ethan that night. Heather was also present. It appears that the pair attempted to negotiate with Kate at the restaurant to prevent her from exposing the deception. Heather may have promised to return the stolen credit cards and money, which were at Ethan's apartment when the three arrived. The court questioned Heather's account and ultimately sentenced her to 39 years in prison. Ethan received a slightly lighter sentence of 25 years, largely due to Heather also being charged with fraud. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Blummel family. Roger Blummel, born January 17, 1965, was raised in a big, close-knit family with strong values. Even in high school, he was driven and ambitious. He worked in transportation and later discovered his talent in sales, where he excelled. Friends say he could sell anything to anyone, thanks to his kind, cheerful personality. He was always happy and loved making others smile. Roger enjoyed a fulfilling life and a strong bond with his family, but something was missing: a life partner. That all changed one day when he met the right person. Although the details of their meeting are unclear, a close friend recalled that Roger was immediately smitten with a young woman and confidently declared his intention to marry her by the end of the evening. The woman who caught his attention was Melissa. Born on January 1, 1960, in Wichita, Melissa grew up in a loving family of 6 siblings, although she tragically lost a younger sister in infancy. Melissa was a kind, diligent, and helpful person who always put others before herself. She started her career as a bank cashier and worked her way up the ranks, earning promotions through her dedication, teamwork, and strong work ethic. Her career was marked by success, ultimately leading to her appointment as vice president of the bank. The first meeting of Roger and Melissa marked the start of a lifelong partnership between two kindred spirits, who tied the knot in 1991. On the surface, the Blummels seemed to have it all. Melissa's rapid rise through the banking ranks, while Roger's charisma enabled him to successfully launch his own business venture. With a natural talent for bringing people together, Roger thrived on sharing good times with friends and spreading joy to those around him. In Melissa, he had found the ideal partner to share in his adventures. What's more, the couple's strong sense of social responsibility drove them to participate in and contribute to various charitable, sporting, and community-driven initiatives in their locality. The Blummel had an idyllic life, but it lacked one thing: a child to bring laughter and joy. After years of trying to conceive, they decided to adopt. A social worker introduced them to Kesha, who was putting her two sons, Tony and Chris, up for adoption. The Blummel wanted a closed adoption, but Kesha preferred open. In the end, the Blummel approach won, and Tony and Chris became part of their family, starting a new life. Tony was amazed by daily dinners. The kids quickly adapted, thriving in elementary school and beyond. They excelled in high school, making diverse friends and starring in sports like wrestling and football. Tony's wrestling prowess earned him second place in a division competition, promising a bright future for the family. Tony's family life took a drastic turn for the worse during his senior year of high school. Until then, he had been a model child, but suddenly he became rebellious and constantly clashed with his parents, resentful that they favored his younger brother Chris. He started drinking, breaking curfews, and even smoking marijuana, causing chaos at home and making it seem like all hope was lost for him to get back on track. Tony had always dreamed of joining the United States Air Force after graduating, but his new behavior ruined his chances. In 2013, he was arrested for a violent offense, and then again for driving under the influence, which meant his records would prevent him from pursuing a career in military aviation. Tony's life spun out of control after these events, lacking direction after high school. He shunned education and jobs, preferring to sleep in and get high on cannabis. Melissa lived in fear of his violent outbursts, and there was another secret the family didn't know. Since 2013, Kesha contacted her biological sons on social media. Tony was excited to reconnect, but Chris seemed unreceptive. Kesha was devastated after giving them up, relieved they were with a good family together. Reconnecting with Tony thrilled her, but she resented the family for allegedly turning Chris against her. Moreover, when Kesha learned about Tony's troubles with his adoptive parents, she saw an opportunity to reconnect with her son and swiftly extended an invitation for him to visit her. At the adoptive home, things worsened. Tony's rage boiled over, and he punched a hole in the wall. This was the last straw. The family realized they and Chris were no longer safe. After failed attempts to address Tony's behavior, Roger and Melissa made the tough decision to ask him to leave. He started by wandering aimlessly, but he soon understood he needed to take action to support himself financially. He got jobs at fast food restaurants, and, to make some extra money, he also sold cannabis. Despite having no fixed address and sleeping at different friends' houses each night, he eventually fell in with a group of young people who were heavily into drug abuse. Among the midst of despairing events, a lifeline emerged for Tony when Kesha extended an invitation for him to move to California and live with her. Tony seized the opportunity with eagerness, and the reunion took place in September 2013 at Kesha's California residence. Accompanied by his high school best friend, Braden, who had dropped out in his junior year to pursue a life of drug dealing, he arrived filled with hope, seeking Kesha's support, who was well-versed in the drug trade, to establish a large-scale marijuana operation in the area, and even discussed entering the medical cannabis market. The reality was that they had arrived to live in a small apartment, which had only one room. It is not hard to imagine that the situation in the place began to be tense, particularly because Sean, Kesha's partner, had 2 jobs and was the only one bringing in money to cover the expenses for 5 people. Kesha only contributed a part of the social assistance she received for her daughter. Kesha, Tony, and Braden spent their days using drugs, and the woman's younger daughter was all the time under that bad influence. Sean reached a breaking point when she discovered Tony and Braden selling marijuana near her house. She told them to stop, citing the danger to her as the property owner. Then, she issued an ultimatum: get a job or leave the apartment. But instead of complying, the group banded together against her, eventually leaving for a nearby hotel for 2 weeks. However, without income, they couldn't afford the hotel bill. They didn't consider getting a decent job due to their financial struggles. Their initial plan was to head back to Kansas, possibly because Tony was familiar with the area from his drug dealings. After nearly a day of driving, they decided to stop in Arizona and spend the night at a hotel. It was during their stay that Tony shared an idea with his companions to kill his adoptive parents in order to inherit their wealth. Once they arrived in Wichita and settled into a hotel room they'd rented for a month, they focused on finalizing the details of this plan. Tony had devised a straightforward plan. He would kill Roger and Melissa, collect the insurance payout, sell off their assets, and use the proceeds to launch a more extensive drug operation. Tony was convinced that his original family would amass a fortune by growing and selling marijuana. He even pinpointed the ideal day to carry out the crime: Friday, November 15th, 2013. This date suited him perfectly, since his brother Chris would be away, attending a wrestling event related to his practice. As a former wrestling star, Tony still maintained connections with some team members, which is how he learned about his brother's commitment that evening. Tony hatched a plan to invite Roger and Melissa to a meeting under the guise of discussing their past issues and making amends. While they were out, Braden would bring Kesha to the empty residence, where she would steal valuables. Tony knew the location of a stash of emergency cash his adoptive parents kept at home. The plan was to make it look like a botched robbery. When Roger and Melissa returned, Kesha would kill them. Initially, everyone thought the plan was solid, but Braden later got cold feet and refused to participate. He did, however, agree to help by obtaining the necessary guns. As an alternative, he suggested his friend Andrew, a former high school acquaintance, who could drive Kesha to the residence and play a supporting role in the crime. Braden obtained 2 pistols from other criminals as promised. It's worth noting that there was never any plan to share the money with Andrew, who was hired to drive and provide backup for Kesha during the robbery in exchange for $11,000. Kesha would ultimately be the one carrying out the heist. In early November 2013, Kesha shared a photo on social media of herself with Tony, accompanied by a caption that read, "A bond that cannot be broken." Then, on Friday, November 15th, Tony's prediction came true. His adoptive parents agreed to meet with him, just as he had foreseen. The encounter took place peacefully. At the Blummel's house, a completely different scenario unfolded. Following Roger and Melissa's departure for the meeting, Kesha and Andrew snuck in, broke into the garage, and started searching through the house. They seized the chance to steal some small valuable items and the cash the couple kept on hand for emergencies. With the first part of their plan accomplished, Kesha and Andrew concealed themselves near the secluded residence, lying in wait for their victims to return. Tony called, saying his meeting ended and he was dropped off at the hotel. The wait was short. As the Blummel vehicle stopped, 2 attackers emerged. Kesha stood by Melissa's side. Andrew aimed at Roger. Melissa, still shocked, recognized the mother of the adopted children. She barely said, "Oh my God, Kesha," before a shot to the head made her collapse. Roger, frantic, tried to help his wife. Kesha approached, gun aimed at him, but it jammed. She tried again. Roger frozen in shock beside his wife's body. The gun finally fired, and he collapsed next to her. After the fatal plan was executed, Kesha and Andrew hastily departed in the vehicle they had arrived in. The Blummel spouses remained at the scene until approximately 9:15 p.m. when Chris returned from his meeting to find the devastating scene. He quickly called 911, reporting that he had just arrived home to find his parents semi-conscious inside their van. He described Roger as coughing and Melissa as nodding her head up and down, both with visible gunshot wounds to their heads. The dispatcher instructed him to attempt resuscitation efforts while emergency services arrived shortly thereafter to take control of the situation. Miraculously, the Blummel was still alive, their lives clinging to a fragile thread, and were swiftly rushed to a hospital. Meanwhile, back at the hotel where they were staying, Kesha appeared to suffer a panic attack, declaring that she urgently needed to take an illicit substance, which she proceeded to do, joined by the other boys. Also, at that moment, Kesha handed over the used gun and a wallet containing stolen cash and micas to be discarded in a nearby stream. Andrew disposed of the evidence in a nearby park's pond. The next day, Tony used the proceeds to start dealing marijuana, earning his first $100 profit. Tragically, on the same day, Melissa lost her battle with illness and passed away at the age of 53. Tony visited his father in the hospital, unaware that he had been previously removed from the Blummel's will and insurance policies. As it turned out, the two heinous crimes had been committed for nothing. In the days that followed, it emerged that Andrew had not received payment and was even unaware that Kesha had stolen cash from the Blummel family's home. Eventually, fate caught up with them. During the initial inspection of the Blummel residence, the police observed that the garage door had been forced open, and upon entering the house, they found everything in disarray, with items scattered haphazardly. It was confirmed that money, jewelry, and other valuables had been stolen. The authorities considered the possibility that the attack on the couple had been a consequence of their arrival, while the thieves were still inside. However, since the fatal assault had occurred prior to the couple's entry into the home, this initial hypothesis was soon dismissed. In the van where Roger and Melissa were attacked, no significant fingerprints were found, although investigators did discover a book casing. Then the authorities shifted their focus to the victims' workplaces, suspecting that a disgruntled client might have sought revenge. However, this theory was also ruled out, so it was time to interview people close to the couple. Tony was first on the detective's list, as he had been the last person seen alive with the victims. But he vehemently denied any involvement, claiming he knew nothing about the incident. According to him, after finishing dinner, he had returned directly to the hotel where he was staying with his mother. The hotel staff corroborated this alibi. Next on the list was Chris, who had discovered the bodies, but he was quickly cleared after verifying that he had been at a dinner with the wrestling team at the time of the incident. However, the investigators discovered an anomaly in his behavior. He didn't appear overly distraught, instead seeming lost in thought. When police pursued this lead and questioned him about his parents' disappearance, Chris promptly replied that one person came to mind. He added that the only individual who might harbor a grudge against their parents and possibly be capable of such an act was his older brother, Tony. With this significant lead, the authorities caught a fortunate break in their hunt for the culprits. A man contacted the police, revealing that a young acquaintance of Tony's had approached him to buy a gun. The detectives homed in on this individual, and upon digging into his background, uncovered a long history of drug-related offenses. Furthermore, they discovered he had accompanied Tony on a trip to California. The suspect was none other than Braden. Shortly after, Braden received a message from his family warning him that the sheriff's office investigators were seeking to question him about the Blummel case. The morning after, Braden voluntarily went to the police station. According to a press report, on his way to the station, Braden stopped at a pond to dispose of an item, allegedly the guns used in the crime, which had not been discarded as planned. As it happened, he was already under surveillance. And when the police searched the water, they found an unused pistol in the bag he had thrown away. Braden's interrogation lasted 3 days, during which he initially denied any involvement in the incident. However, he eventually cracked under the pressure from the authorities, confessing everything he knew, revealing that the idea for the attack originated with Tony. Tony Blummel, 18, and his biological mother, Kesha, 35, were arrested on November 19, 2013, at their hotel. Andrew, also 18, was taken into custody, and Braden, another 18-year-old, was arrested the following day. Initially, Kesha denied any involvement in the robbery and other crimes, while the three young men confessed. On November 25, 2013, the accused made their first court appearance via video conference, facing identical charges: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, burglary, and theft. Bail was set at $500,000 for the three young men and $1 million for Kesha. On December 21st, Roger's heart stopped beating, and at just 48 years old, he was reunited with his beloved Melissa. Following Roger's death, the situation for the woman and the three young men took a dire turn as they faced the possibility of being charged with capital murder, which carried the risk of a death penalty sentence. On January 3, 2014, the 4 detainees were formally charged with 1 count of capital murder for allegedly killing multiple people in the same incident. Kesha also faced additional charges: 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of theft. The preliminary hearing took place on July 17th of that same year, by which time Braden had cut a deal with authorities, agreeing to become the prosecution's star witness in exchange for leniency in his sentence. In 2015, following a year of negotiations, Braden and 2 others implicated in the crime reached agreements with the prosecution. Under these agreements, the accused parties would not contest the charges brought against them, and in return, they would relinquish their right to appeal their sentences. In exchange, the prosecution agreed to refrain from pursuing the death penalty and to dismiss certain charges. In a series of separate hearings commencing mid-2015, each of the accused parties formally confirmed their intention to plead guilty. Kesha got life in prison without parole for capital murder, plus 10 years for aggravated robbery. Her sentences will run back to back. In court, she expressed regret and respect for the victim's family, but denied involvement in the crime. She's still in a high-security prison today. Tony Blummel, known to all as Tony, received the same sentence as his mother. At the hearing, his aunt Christina read a victim impact statement, thanking authorities for justice and mentioning the love Roger and Melissa had shown Tony. Tony listened in silence, tears welling up. Christina told him he'd chosen his path, and one day he might understand the consequences of those choices. Tony's now in a correctional facility with a record of many infractions. A week later, Andrew was found guilty of first and second-degree murder, sentenced to life and 155 months. Last, Braden, who'd made a deal with prosecutors, was guilty of second-degree murder, sentenced to 242 years. His first release chance is May 28, 2035, but he's had 71 disciplinary reports for bad behavior. District Attorney satisfied with case outcome. Despite waiving appeal rights, Kesha tried and failed. Undisputed, Roger and Melissa Blummel's lives ended tragically. Kesha's excess-driven life led to tragedy, sparked by a descendant rejecting her. For his part, Tony repaid the couple's love and care with resentment, envy, and violence, opting for an unjustifiable path of substance abuse that ultimately led him to commit a double crime. As a consequence, Kesha's younger daughter was forced to grow up in a foster home. In contrast, Chris Blummel, with the support of his family, managed to overcome the ordeal and build a fulfilling life. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sarah Yarborough. Sarah Yarborough was born in Portland on June 12, 1975. Shortly after, her parents relocated to Federal Way, a suburb of Seattle, where she grew up with 2 siblings, forming a strong bond with her youngest brother. From an early age, Sarah demonstrated a keen interest in music and ballet, spending considerable time honing her skills. Her academic prowess earned her a spot in a school program that allowed her to travel to New Zealand twice. As she entered her teenage years, Sarah joined the cheerleading team at her high school, where she developed a large social circle. She was renowned for her kind and compassionate nature, often lending a helping hand to those in need. On Saturday, December 14, 1991, 16-year-old Sarah was supposed to meet her cheerleading team at the school building, where a bus would pick them up for an event. She drove her father's car to the school, but arrived at the wrong time, thinking the bus would arrive at 8 a.m. when it was actually scheduled for 9 a.m. As her friends gradually arrived at the meeting point, they couldn't find Sarah anywhere. Some students noticed her car in the parking lot, but she wasn't inside. Even when the bus arrived, Sarah was still missing. Her friends found this strange, but they had no way to contact her since they didn't have mobile phones at the time. Around the same time, two 12-year-old children were exploring the wooded area behind the tennis courts on the school grounds when they noticed something unusual. A man emerged from behind the bushes, took a breath, and walked away in the opposite direction. Although the children found this odd, they didn't pay much attention and continued walking. A few meters ahead, they stumbled upon a horrifying sight. A young woman lying unresponsive on the ground, who they thought might be dead. The children rushed back home to tell their parents, and one of the children's parents returned to the scene with them. Meanwhile, the other child's father decided to follow the suspicious man they had seen earlier. The child remembered seeing a car that resembled a Chevrolet Nova leaving the area, and since he lived near the school, his father decided to try to locate that car. After a while, he spotted a similar car, but unfortunately, he quickly lost sight of it and was unable to find it again. At the same time, the parents of the other child rushed to the school, where they discovered the young woman lying on the ground, likely dead. They promptly entered the school building and contacted the police. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed the young woman's death. They also quickly identified her as Sarah. The police deduced that the victim had been strangled based on the marks on her neck. Some of her personal belongings, including her jacket, underwear, and socks, were found nearby. However, her purse and car keys were discovered in the school parking lot, leading investigators to suspect that the assailant might have attacked her near her vehicle and then dragged her behind the trees. The body was sent to forensic experts for examination, and the police initiated their search for evidence. As a first step, they interviewed everyone who was in the school premises and its surrounding area. The two boys who discovered Sarah provided a rough description of the man who emerged from behind the bushes near her body. They described him as a tall, approximately 20-year-old man with shoulder-length, reddish hair, wearing a dark coat and black trousers. Soon, the police located another witness, and this is where the story takes a surprising turn. A man out for a run observed a strange scene in the same wooded area. He saw a girl lying next to the bushes, with a man hovering over her. The girl was completely still, and the witness initially thought the couple was engaging in intimate behavior in that spot. However, when he ran back through the area in the opposite direction a few minutes later, both the man and the girl were still there, in the same positions. At no point did he suspect that a serious crime was being committed. The witness, a recent immigrant to the United States from a different cultural background, was uncertain about typical behavior in the country. Despite this, he was able to provide the police with a rough description of the attacker, which matched the accounts given by the children who found Sarah's body. The police interviewed dozens of people who had been near the school, but no other useful information came to light. The medical examiners who performed the autopsy on Sarah's body determined that the cause of death was strangulation. It appeared that the attacker had used his own socks to strangle her. A severe head wound was also found, and experts believed that Sarah had lost consciousness due to this blow, which correlated with the runner's account of seeing her lying motionless on the ground. Forensic experts analyzed Sarah's clothing and discovered traces of male DNA on nearly all her garments. However, at that time, in 1991, there was no DNA database to match these samples against, so investigators had to rely on direct comparisons with DNA samples from specific suspects. Another significant finding was that although forensic experts found male DNA on Sarah's clothing, the forensic doctor reported no signs of sexual assault on her body. Based on this information, investigators pieced together their own theory of what happened. Since Sarah had arrived at the school almost an hour early, and she was alone in the parking lot, it's likely that her attacker saw her, waited for her to leave the car, struck her on the head with an object, causing her to lose consciousness. The attacker then dragged her body behind some trees, where it was later found. The assailant removed some of her clothing, engaged in inappropriate acts, and eventually strangled her using her own socks. When the children who found Sarah's body reported the car they thought the attacker had fled in, detectives started searching for a Chevrolet Nova. They soon found one, but the driver proved to have an alibi. He had just delivered donuts that morning, and his DNA didn't match the DNA on Sarah's clothes. It seemed the kids had simply seen the car driving by and mistakenly assumed the killer was inside. In fact, none of them could recall for certain whether they had seen a man get into a car from the bushes. In the days that followed, police continued to search for witnesses and new leads, but made no significant progress. Despite the horror of the event, classes resumed on Monday. The fact that the murder had occurred just a short distance from their school, and the killer remained at large with no known identity, added to the unease. Afraid to walk alone, the girls were escorted to their cars or buses by the boys from the sports teams, ensuring they weren't left alone on the street. Approximately 70 potential witnesses were present at the school and its surroundings on the morning of the incident. Investigators interviewed each of them, but unfortunately, no new information came to light. Based on the accounts of the two children and the runner, a composite sketch of the attacker was created and circulated to local newspapers and television stations. The case received widespread media attention, and over the next few weeks, the police received hundreds of testimony. Each tip was thoroughly investigated, but in every instance, it led to a dead end. One promising lead involved a man who matched the suspect's description and had a criminal record. However, his DNA did not match the sample found on the victim's clothing, and the lead was eventually ruled out. The case remained stagnant for months, with the police dealing with a staggering 4,000 tips, but lacking the resources to effectively follow up on each one. As new cases emerged monthly, the investigators' attention was increasingly divided, further hindering progress on the case. When Sarah's family learned that the police were struggling to manage the influx of tips, they stepped in to help in any way they could. One family member worked for a tech company and successfully lobbied the company's management to lend the police department a powerful computer worth $150,000 in the 1990s. This generous donation allowed the police to centralize and process the leads more efficiently, categorizing them for easy review. Despite their best efforts, however, every lead ultimately led to a dead end, and the case remained stagnant for years to come. 2 years later, Sarah's classmates prepared to graduate, and as a tribute to their friend, they raised a substantial amount of money to create a memorial in her honor. The memorial took the form of a bench featuring a metal casting of Sarah's belongings alongside a poignant photo of her dog reaching for her purse. Although the case was periodically reopened and re-examined in the years that followed, the outcome remained the same. The perpetrator remained at large. During this time, the police conducted thousands of interviews and collected DNA samples from nearly 300 potential suspects. But all these efforts ultimately proved fruitless. In 2011, 20 years after the murder, a detective decided to utilize modern technology to aid in the investigation. He contacted a genetic genealogy company, inquiring if they could help locate relatives of the individual who left DNA on the victim's body. The experts accepted the challenge, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. Two main factors contributed to their failure. Firstly, Genetic genealogy was still in its early stages, and the experts' capabilities were limited. For instance, they couldn't simultaneously search for both male and female relatives from the same DNA sample. If the DNA was from a male, they could only search for male familial connections, and vice versa. Secondly, legal obstacles hindered their progress, as various laws prohibited the use of genetic data samples to search for relatives of suspects. The researchers the detective approached had spent years tracing the genetic family tree of the British passengers who arrived in the United States on the Mayflower in 1620. By analyzing the DNA of Sarah's attacker, they found a link to one of the ship's passengers, Robert Fuller. However, tracking the attacker's lineage proved extremely difficult, especially considering the passage of time. Although the Mayflower had only around 100 passengers, their descendants now number over 25 million. Despite the initial setback, this was the first time genetic genealogy had been used to solve a crime. The detective gathered available information and identified several local residents with the surname Fuller. He showed them pictures of the men, but none were recognized by the witnesses, including a runner and two men who had stumbled upon the body as children. Next, the detective collected DNA samples from all the local Fullers and sent them to the lab. Although none of the samples matched the attacker's DNA, one surprising discovery emerged. One of the men was a distant descendant of Robert Fuller from the Mayflower. However, he was not the killer and had no knowledge of any distant relatives living nearby. The detective retired in 2017, and a new team of investigators took over the case. In 2011, a company had taken over the study of the DNA sample from the assailant, and the new team reached out to them. Given the significant advancements in genetic material study capabilities, the experts agreed to try to trace the assailant's lineage. Over the next 2 years, they painstakingly worked through public databases to find even the most distant relatives of the assailant, then manually traced their family connections to individuals who lived during the time of Sarah's death. After eliminating several thousand individuals, they finally got a break in September 2019. They identified 2 new potential suspects, brothers Edward and Patrick Nicholas, who were descendants of Robert Fuller. The experts concluded that it was highly probable that a DNA sample found on Sarah's clothing belonged to one of the brothers at the time of the murder. The older brother, Edward, was a career criminal with a long history of violent offenses, and his DNA profile was already in the FBI database, ruling him out as a suspect in Sarah's murder. The younger brother, Patrick Nicholas, had also been arrested multiple times for violent crimes, but his DNA sample was not in the database because it was collected before the DNA profiles of offenders were added. The detectives put 55-year-old Patrick under surveillance right away. 2 days later, they got their chance. Patrick went to the laundromat, and while waiting for his clothes to wash, he stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. When he was done, he carelessly threw the butt on the ground. One of the officers quickly picked it up and put it in an evidence bag, then returned to his car. Patrick repeated this process, stepping outside to smoke again, and this time a cloth handkerchief accidentally fell out of his pocket. The police thought it wise to take this second piece of evidence, just in case they couldn't get a DNA sample from the cigarette butt. As it turned out, the forensic experts had no problem obtaining samples from both items. The next day, they had the long-awaited news for the detective. Patrick's DNA matched the traces found on Sarah's clothing back in 1991 perfectly. The judge immediately issued a warrant for Patrick's arrest, and the police took him into custody. It took investigators 5 days to identify the suspect and formally charge him with murder. Once his biography was made public, an obvious question arose. Why had a man with such a criminal history not been considered a suspect for 28 years? Patrick Nicholas, at 19, had attempted to assault a young woman who managed to escape by jumping into a river and swimming to safety. He was later arrested and spent 4 years in prison. In 1994, He was arrested again for trying to assault a minor, but his DNA was not recorded in any database because the charge was not serious enough. Over the next 3 decades, his name never surfaced during investigations, and he didn't appear in over 4,000 leads. It was eventually revealed that genetic genealogy experts couldn't trace him back to Robert Fuller because Patrick was adopted and grew up with a different surname. One of the men who discovered Sarah's body when they were children in 1991 immediately asserted that Patrick was undoubtedly the same killer. He admitted that the incident had deeply affected him, as he was only 12 years old when the body was discovered, and the perpetrator had seen his face for many years. The witness lived in constant fear that the killer would come after him, and only after Patrick's arrest did he finally feel safe. Patrick's trial did not start until 2023. Despite claiming innocence, the main piece of evidence, his DNA on the victim's clothing, was a major obstacle. His lawyer attempted to argue that the presence of Patrick's DNA did not necessarily mean he was guilty, but this claim was dismissed. The lawyer also questioned the accuracy of the DNA analysis, but experts deemed this entirely unreliable. In the end, Patrick was found guilty of first-degree murder without premeditation on May 25th. He received a prison sentence of 45 years and 8 months, effectively ensuring he would never be released. At the sentencing, Patrick remained emotionless, in contrast to Sarah's family, who thanked the judge, trial participants, and investigators for bringing the killer to justice after 28 years of evasion. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Adrienne Jones. Adrienne Jessica Jones was a bright light in Mansfield in 1995. As a 16-year-old junior at Mansfield High School, she captivated everyone with her beauty, exceptional qualities, and impressive achievements. Adrienne was an outstanding student, consistently excelling in advanced honors courses and demonstrating a strong work ethic. She spent at least 2 hours each night studying to ensure her success, which earned her high grades. Her kindness, intelligence, and infectious spirit made her a role model and a beloved figure among her classmates and teachers. In addition to her academic prowess, Adrienne was a talented athlete. She was a dedicated member of the girls' soccer team, showcasing remarkable skill and dedication on the field. After graduating from Mansfield High School, Adrienne's dream was to become a veterinarian and help animals. After a game injury forced her to temporarily leave her team, Adrienne didn't give up on sports. Instead, she joined the girls' cross-country team, which allowed her to stay active and improve her fitness. She threw herself into the new challenge, working hard to get in shape. Her dedication paid off, and she soon became a key member of the cross-country team. In addition to her academic and athletic pursuits, Adrienne also held down a part-time job, working 20 hours a week at a local fast food restaurant, Golden Fried Chicken. Despite her busy schedule, Adrienne enjoyed being the center of attention, particularly from teenage boys in Mansfield. Her friends would even describe her as a bit of a flirt. She took great care in her appearance, spending at least 2 hours each day on her makeup to ensure she looked perfect. Adrienne, like many teenagers, often tested the limits set by her parents. Despite her good nature, her parents were particularly protective of her due to the changing environment in Mansfield, where crime was on the rise. They implemented a strict 9 p.m. curfew on weekends to ensure her safety, requiring her to provide proof of her activities, such as ticket stubs, if she wanted to stay out later. To prevent her from sneaking out, her father also nailed her bedroom window shut. Although Adrienne occasionally disobeyed her parents and left the house at night to meet her friends, on Sunday, December 3rd, 1995, she was given special permission to stay up late to talk to her boyfriend, Tracy Smith, who was out of town with his parents. During their phone conversation, Adrienne's mother overheard her mention that another call was coming in. When asked about the caller's identity, Adrienne said it was David from her cross-country team, who seemed upset about something. Adrianne's family started their day as usual the next morning, but her mother's concern grew when she heard Adrianne's alarm still going off in her bedroom. When she went to check on her, she discovered that Adrianne was missing, and her bed had not been slept in. Despite trying to stay calm, Adrianne's mother quickly became worried. She initially thought Adrianne might have gone for an early morning run, but this idea was quickly dismissed when she saw Adrianne's running shoes still on the floor. In the past, Adrianne had occasionally sneaked out at night to meet friends, but she had always returned home by morning, making her mother even more worried about her disappearance. Worried about Adrianne, her parents contacted the police. Unbeknownst to them, a shocking discovery was made on a farm several miles away. At around 7 a.m., on Seton Road in Grand Prairie, Texas, a man was on his way to check his mailbox when he noticed that the gate to his property had been knocked down. Curious, he entered his farm and was met with an unsettling scene. Initially, the man thought he was looking at roadkill, but as he got closer, he realized it was a lifeless teenage girl lying on the ground. The man immediately called the police, who arrived to find a disturbing sight. The teenager had been shot execution style, with 2 bullet wounds on her left cheek and forehead. In addition to these gunshot wounds, her head had suffered severe injuries. Moreover, her arms and legs were covered in scrapes and bruises, indicating that she had run through the farm's barbed wire gate. A teenager's violent murder sparked a desperate investigation. The fact that she was found in her nightclothes suggested she had been preparing for bed when her life was brutally cut short. The execution-style killing led police to consider possible links to gang violence or drugs. After discovering the body on the farm, the Grand Prairie Police immediately alerted all nearby agencies, sending out a detailed description of the victim, including her age, height, weight, and other physical characteristics. They hoped that another agency might recognize the description and make a connection to a missing person. It wasn't long before the Mansfield police got in touch with Grand Prairie officers, having made a match. The Mansfield police identified the murdered teenager as Adrianne Jones. With the victim identified, the police had the heartbreaking task of informing Adrianne's parents about her tragic death. When they broke the news to her mother, she was overcome with grief. In the small town of Mansfield, news of Adrianne's murder spread quickly through her high school, leaving her classmates and friends devastated. Classes were interrupted as the news traveled through the halls, and students tearfully consoled one another. The town was on high alert following the discovery of Adrianne's body in a field, with rumors and theories circulating about her death. One theory was that Adrianne was involved in drugs, while others suspected a serial killer might be living among them. Adrianne's parents cooperated with the police, providing information about the last time they saw their daughter. Her mother specifically mentioned a phone call Adrianne had with her boyfriend, Tracy, and another teenager, David, who joined the call while Adrianne was on the phone. After midnight on the night of Adrianne's murder, one of her younger brothers heard a car engine outside their house. When he looked out the window, he saw a pickup truck driving away. The police were interested in identifying a person named David, who had called Adrianne that night. To learn more, they spoke with Adrianne's cross-country coach, who mentioned a team member named David Graham. However, the coach was surprised to hear that David had called Adrianne, as there was no indication that they had ever interacted before. David Graham was a 17-year-old high school student with big dreams. After watching his first air show, he decided he wanted to become an Air Force pilot. From then on, he dedicated himself to achieving his goal. David was well liked by his peers at Mansfield High School, where he was popular and charming. Many girls were attracted to him, but he was in a relationship with Diane Zamora, a high school senior who shared his desire to enter the military. Diane stood out from the crowd, actively pursuing her aspirations. After Adrianne's murder, the police interviewed David Graham, who acknowledged knowing her from their cross-country team, but claimed their relationship never went beyond friendship. When asked if he had contacted Adrienne on the night of her death, David denied it, saying he was home studying with his girlfriend, Diane Zamora. The police investigated David as a possible suspect, seeking information from Adrienne's friends to see if she had ever mentioned him. However, one of her closest friends, who was privy to Adrienne's secrets, said Adrienne had never discussed David with her. The police also checked Adrienne's phone book and found David's number was not listed, which further led them to believe he was not involved in her murder. As a result, they never administered a polygraph test to David and eventually cleared him as a suspect. The police investigated Adrienne's boyfriend, Tracy Smith, as a suspect in her murder. However, they cleared him after verifying his alibi, which placed him out of town with his family on the night of the murder. Tracy also passed a polygraph test, further supporting his innocence. During his police interview, Tracy suggested they investigate someone named Brian, whom Adrienne had mentioned was calling her on the night of her murder, while they were on the phone. The police identified the Brian in question as Brian McMillian, a local teenager. Their investigation into Brian McMillian revealed that he used to work at a pharmacy near the restaurant where Adrienne used to work. Brian had developed an obsession with Adrienne and would often visit the restaurant to catch a glimpse of her. Eventually, Adrienne grew tired of his constant presence and began hiding in the back whenever she saw him coming. The police questioned Brian McMillian about the murder of Adrienne Jones. At first, he claimed to have no knowledge of her, but later admitted to knowing her. When asked if he had talked to her on the night of her murder, Brian said he didn't remember. He explained that he had been drinking that night due to feelings of depression and loneliness. The officers also asked Brian if he had visited Adrienne's house on the night of her murder, and he acknowledged that he might have done so. The police asked Brian's father if his son could take a lie detector test, but his father refused. 1 week later, the police raided Brian's house with guns, a decision made due to concerns that he might be armed. The police took this precaution to ensure everyone's safety, including their own. After Brian was arrested for Adrienne's murder, many people came forward to show their support for him. Brian's friends said he was a gentle and non-violent person. His father also confirmed that Brian was at home all night when Adrienne was killed and didn't leave. Despite this, Brian was held in jail for 3 weeks, missing Christmas and New Year's, while the investigation and legal proceedings continued. During this time, the district attorney's office asked Brian to take a polygraph test, which he passed successfully. After this, the district attorney's office had little evidence to link Brian to Adrienne's murder, so they released him from custody. 9 months into the investigation, the police in Mansfield, Texas, finally got a breakthrough, and it came from Annapolis, Maryland, where Diane Zamora was attending the Naval Academy. Diane Zamora, a cadet at the Naval Academy, allegedly confessed to her fellow students that she and her boyfriend, David Graham, had murdered a girl named Adrienne Jones in Mansfield, Texas. The Mansfield police traveled to Annapolis, Maryland, to interview Diane, but she denied making any such admission. The Naval Academy suspended Diane and sent her home pending an investigation. Since Diane was uncooperative, the police went to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado, to question David. Initially, David claimed he didn't know why Diane would fabricate a story about killing Adrienne Jones. However, during the interview, David began to crack and asked to write a statement. In a 4.5-page confession letter, David detailed how he and Diane planned and carried out the murder of Adrienne Jones, including a cross-country event in November 1995, where he offered to drive Adrienne home. During the ride, David and Adrienne parked in an elementary school parking lot and had sex. Afterwards, David felt overwhelmed with guilt because he loved his girlfriend Diane deeply and knew that his infidelity would cause her immense pain. One evening, while David was helping Diane study for her SATs, they got into an argument. Unable to keep his secret any longer, David broke down in tears and confessed his infidelity to Diane. He told her that he had hooked up with Adrienne, which shattered Diane's heart and left her feeling deeply hurt and angry. Diane was inconsolable and lashed out at David, screaming and arguing with him. She was so angry that she wished he were dead, and she felt intense hatred towards Adrienne. Diane's emotions were too much to handle, and she struggled to come to terms with what had happened. David pleaded with Diane, promising to do whatever it took to save their relationship. David and Diane decided that the only way to repair their relationship was to kill Adrienne. In his confession letter, David admitted that on December 3rd, he called Adrienne Jones and asked her to secretly leave her house late at night to meet with him. He specifically asked Adrienne to keep their meeting private and not tell anyone else about it. David originally planned to lure Adrienne into a trap, kill her by breaking her neck, and then dispose of her body in a lake. On the agreed night at 2:30 a.m., David picked up Adrienne in his car while Diane hid in the hatchback. They drove to a secluded spot 10 miles out of town, turning off the highway onto Satan Road. David stopped the car, and Adrienne subtly adjusted her seat, creating the impression they were about to be intimate. Unbeknownst to Adrienne, David had secretly signaled for Diane to emerge from the trunk. Diane came out of the rear of the vehicle and approached the front. Diane confronted Adrienne, who was seated in the passenger seat. Diane then hit Adrienne on the head with a weight from David's gym set. Despite being severely injured, Adrienne managed to escape by crawling out of the car window. David and Diane panicked, and David grabbed his 9mm Makarov weapon to chase after Adrienne. Adrienne was severely injured and collapsed in a nearby field due to her head wound. When David caught up to her, he shot her twice and then returned to his car. After Adrienne died, David and his accomplice Diane exchanged "I love you" as their first words to each other. The police later questioned Diane, who had a statement prepared to confess her involvement. David and Diane were arrested and charged with capital murder. Although they initially confessed, they later retracted their statements, with David claiming Diane acted alone and Diane alleging David committed the crime by himself. In 1998, Adrienne's mother requested that the death penalty be removed as a possible sentence for David and Diane. Diane's trial began in February 1998. Multiple witnesses testified that Diane showed no remorse for killing Adrienne. The jury found Diane guilty of capital murder, resulting in an automatic life imprisonment sentence, with the possibility of parole in 40 years. David Graham was convicted of murdering Adrienne Jones and received a life sentence, with the possibility of parole in 40 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lori Vallow. Lori Vallow was born on June 26, 1973, in Loma Linda, California. She grew up in a large family with 2 older brothers and 3 sisters. Her parents, Denise and Barry Cox, worked hard to provide for their children. Lori was especially close to her brother Alex, who always looked out for her and protected her, even during her school years. As she grew older, Lori became a beautiful and charismatic young woman with many admirers. She was a blonde with a slender figure and a captivating smile. She enjoyed being the center of attention and was a spirited and adventurous person. In the spring of 1992, at the age of 18, Lori married her high school sweetheart, Nelson Yanes. However, the young couple soon realized they had rushed into marriage and were not ready for family life. As a result, their marriage ended in less than a year. They did not have any children together. In the fall of 1995, Lori remarried, this time to a man named William Leah. A year later, they had a son named Colby. However, their marriage ended in 1998, just 2 years later. Lori retained custody of her son. In 2001, Lori married Joseph Anthony Ryan, who adopted her son from a previous marriage the following year. They also had a daughter, Tylee. However, this marriage ended in 2005. Shortly after, Joseph visited their children and got into an altercation with Lori's brother, Alex. Alex claimed he was defending Lori's honor, as Joseph had insulted her. As a result, Lori was fined and received a short prison sentence. After her divorce, Lori met Charles Anthony Vallow and married him in February 2006. Charles was 17 years older than Lori, but this significant age difference didn't pose a problem for they. Charles had two teenage sons, Zachary and Nicholas, from previous relationships. The family initially lived in Nevada, where Lori's children from previous marriages resided, while Charles's sons visited during holidays or weekends. Charles owned a small business that provided a stable income to support the family. Lori did not work, but Charles never criticized her for it. In 2014, they officially adopted Charles's grandnephew, Joshua Jackson Vallow, also known as JJ, who had autism. The family was able to provide JJ with the expensive therapy he needed. By the end of 2014, the family decided to move to the Hawaiian Islands. By this time, Colby and Charles's older children were living on their own, so the Vallow family moved to the island with just the four of them, Lori, Charles, Tylee, and JJ. They settled in a popular tourist area and decided to open a beach bar, specializing in fresh juices, smoothies, and non-alcoholic cocktails. Despite their efforts and Charles's experience in trade, the business struggled to compete and ultimately failed. Around this time, Lori developed an interest in spiritual literature and became particularly drawn to a series of books called Standing in Holy Places by Chad Daybell. She was deeply captivated by his views and ideas, becoming almost obsessed with his writings, and began reading his books daily. In 2016, Lori Vallow and her family were forced to leave Hawaii and relocate to the mainland, eventually settling in Arizona. While her husband Charles worked hard to provide for the family, Lori became increasingly obsessed with her faith, drifting away from reality. 2 years later, in October 2018, Lori and her friend Melanie attended a seminar called Preparing People for the Second Coming of Christ in a nearby town, led by Chad Daybell. Lori was a huge fan of Daybell and was thrilled to meet him in person. She sat in the front row, captivated by his words, and caught his attention. After the event, Daybell engaged with his followers, and Lori stayed behind to talk to him. She was drawn to him and asked if she could touch his hand. Daybell, looking into her eyes, told her that they had been husband and wife in 7 past lives. Chad and Lori started communicating regularly a few weeks after exchanging contact information. When Lori's husband traveled to Nevada for work, Lori invited Chad to host a gathering at her home, which drew around a dozen people. They discussed God and the Judgment Day. Lori and Chad began working together to prepare people for what they believed would be a catastrophic judgment. They started producing podcasts, leading sermons, and writing articles on the topic. As Lori became more engrossed in her newfound faith, she began to detach from reality and her family. Charles didn't immediately realize the full extent of the change, believing it to be a passing phase that would soon go away. However, by the time Charles realized the severity of the situation, it was too late. Lori's beliefs became increasingly extreme, and she started talking about battling dark spirits and zombies. She claimed that God had chosen her for a special mission to destroy these evil entities. Charles's efforts to bring his wife back to reality were unsuccessful, and she started to view him as a malevolent entity that needed to be eliminated. By the end of 2018, the marriage between Lori and Charles was on the verge of collapse. In February 2019, while Charles was away on a week-long business trip, Lori changed the locks on their shared home. When Charles returned, he found himself locked out of his own house, his personal car and family truck were missing, and a significant amount of $35,000 had been withdrawn from his account. Charles tried to enter the house, calling out for his wife, but Lori, in a frantic state, rushed outside, shouting threats and curses. She claimed that her husband's soul had long been dead, and his body was possessed by a demon, repeatedly saying, "I don't know who you are and what you've done with my husband." Charles immediately went to the police station to report Lori for stealing from him, blocking access to his home and children, and threatening him with physical harm. As a result, a protective order was issued, which prohibited Lori from approaching him. During the police interview, Charles expressed concerns about Lori's extreme religious behavior, her claims that the world was ending soon, and her tendency to label people as either good or evil. Although the officers seemed skeptical and even made fun of Charles, they still issued the protective order. The next day, Charles filed for divorce and changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his mother and sister. According to his lawyer, Charles was worried about the well-being of his son JJ, who needed special care. He trusted that his mother and sister would manage the insurance payout responsibly and take care of JJ if anything happened to him. Months later, in an attempt to reconcile with his wife Lori and salvage their marriage, Charles made a critical error. He dropped the restraining order that had been protecting him. As a result, Charles began visiting Lori at her home, driven by a desire to reconnect with his children and revive his relationship. Tragically, on July 11, 2019, Charles's bid at reconciliation ended in disaster. When he arrived at the house, he was shot twice in the chest and killed. Lori's brother, Alex, admitted to the shooting and called 911. He claimed he acted in self-defense, alleging that Charles had attacked him first with a baseball bat. According to Alex, he responded by firing his pistol twice without taking aim. Witnesses to the shooting included the homeowner and the children. Although their testimonies were slightly inconsistent, the court ultimately ruled Charles's death an unintentional killing in self-defense. It's worth noting that Alex sustained only minor injuries. On the same day Charles's body was taken to the morgue, Lori hosted a party at their house, complete with music, numerous guests, and a poolside disco in the exact spot where her husband had been shot, with visible bloodstains still present. Strangely, she made no arrangements for his funeral and didn't inform anyone about his death. It wasn't until a week later, when Charles's unclaimed body remained in the morgue, that his sons, mother, sister, and other relatives learned of his passing. Lori's life took a dramatic turn after her husband's death. She sold their home in Arizona and moved to Rexburg, Idaho, with her children. They settled in the same housing complex as her brother Alex Cox and his wife, Tammy. Lori enrolled her son in a special needs school, but her 16-year-old daughter, Tylee, did not attend any school. As a result, many neighbors were unaware that Lori even had a second child, as Tylee was rarely seen outside. Around the same time, Lori made a disturbing comment about her daughter, referring to her as a dark entity in a phone conversation with a friend. On September 8, 2019, Lori, her children, and her brother Alex went on a trip to Yellowstone Park, where they met up with Chad. Several photos from the trip show Tylee, but after that day, she was never seen again. 2 weeks later, on September 24, 2019, Lori withdrew her son's documents from the special needs school, claiming she would homeschool him. Chad's 49-year-old wife, Tammy, died suddenly on October 19, less than a month after her husband's affair with Lori began. According to Chad, Tammy had been suffering from a cold and cough, and it was presumed that she died from respiratory failure in her sleep. There were no signs of violence on her body, and her death was ruled natural. However, Chad refused to allow an autopsy to determine the cause of death, a decision that raised no suspicions at the time. Following Tammy's passing, Chad received approximately $500,000 in insurance payouts. 2 weeks after Tammy's death, Chad and Lori traveled to the Hawaiian Islands, where they got married in a beachside ceremony. This news came as a shock to Chad's children, who were still grieving the loss of their mother and struggled to understand their father's actions. After returning to Arizona, they lived together and misled others by claiming that Lori's children were staying with relatives or that she didn't have any children at all. They also rented a storage unit and moved the children's belongings there, essentially erasing them from their home. On December 12, 2019, approximately 1 month later, Alex unexpectedly died at his home, appearing to have suffered a heart attack. At his family's request, no autopsy was performed, and his death was attributed to natural causes. As time went on, more and more people began inquiring about the whereabouts of Lori's children. She skillfully deceived her neighbors and acquaintances with lies, but it was more challenging to convince her relatives. Colby, Lori's eldest son, who had lost touch with his mother after moving away, made an effort to reconnect with his younger sister. However, Lori initially pretended to be her daughter, Tylee, when Colby contacted her. He soon became suspicious that something was amiss. Meanwhile, Charles Vallow's relatives were concerned about the welfare of his grandchild, JJ, and repeatedly requested to visit or contact him. Lori consistently denied or made up excuses to prevent them from seeing the boy. The situation escalated when JJ's grandmother reported his disappearance to the police. Colby also approached the authorities to help locate his younger sister. When police officers visited Lori's home to speak with the children, she lied about their whereabouts, claiming they were visiting relatives. After this information proved false, the police gave Lori an ultimatum. She had a week to appear at the police station with the children. Instead, she and her husband fled to Hawaii. On February 20, 2020, Lori was arrested on the island of Kauai and taken back to Arizona. A search of Lori and Chad's home was conducted, but no signs of the missing children, Tylee and JJ, were found. Initially, Chad had defended Lori, claiming she didn't have any children, but now he was also under suspicion. It wasn't until June 9 that police discovered human remains buried in their backyard. Forensic analysis confirmed that the bodies were those of Ty and JJ. Further investigation led to the exhumation of the bodies of Tammy Daybell and Alex Cox to determine the true causes of their deaths. Toxicology reports revealed the presence of chemicals that could induce heart failure, suggesting that their deaths were not natural. Lori and Chad's trial began in January 2021. They faced charges of conspiracy, first-degree criminal acts, grand theft, deceit, and insurance fraud. Additionally, the circumstances surrounding Charles Vallow's death were reclassified from self-defense to premeditated murder. In court, witnesses testified that Lori referred to her children as dark entities and claimed she wanted to save their souls. There were allegations that the deaths of Tylee and JJ may have been ritualistic in nature. Notably, Tylee's body was partially burned, and Chad had previously sent Lori an email categorizing people, including Tylee, as having dark spirits. Lori and her husband, Chad, were both facing the possibility of capital punishment due to the severity of the charges against them. However, in May 2021, Lori's defense team successfully argued that she was incompetent to stand trial, bringing the proceedings to a halt. Meanwhile, all 5 of Chad's adult children maintained that their father was innocent and had been framed by Lori and her co-conspirator. After receiving treatment at a psychiatric facility, Lori was deemed fit to stand trial again in 2022. In March 2023, the judge ruled that capital punishment would not be an option for Lori, a decision that the prosecution is still trying to appeal. Lori was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in July 2023. Chad's trial is ongoing, and he still faces the possibility of capital punishment. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Donald Albin Blom. Donald Blom was born on February 5, 1949, in Minnesota. He had a difficult childhood, experiencing physical abuse from his father from a young age until his teenage years. As a result, Blom developed behavioral problems and began drinking heavily at an early age. These issues continued into his teenage years, and Blom was eventually sent to a reform school in 10th grade, where he frequently skipped classes. The trauma of his violent relationship with his father likely contributed to his behavioral and alcohol problems, which became more pronounced during puberty. Fast forward to May 26, 1999. Caitlin Poirier was working the night shift alone at a convenience store. After midnight, a customer called the police to report that the clerk was missing. When officers arrived, they found the store empty. Reviewing the surveillance footage, they saw a large man grabbing Caitlin by the neck and leading her out of the store around 11:40 p.m. A man wearing jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23 was seen acting suspiciously near a store. Catherine Hannick, an employee at the nearby Subway restaurant, reported seeing the man behaving strangely before Caitlin's store closed. As she drove home, she coincidentally encountered the same man, who was driving a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with an extended cab and white markings on the side. Hannick followed the truck from a distance and saw it circle the maintenance area several times before entering Moose Lake and stopping in a cafe parking lot. She also noted that Caitlin's car was still in the store's parking lot when she left work. Based on Hannick's description and partially recovered surveillance footage, police created a rough sketch of the suspected kidnapper. The suspect had long blonde hair and looked approximately 25 years old. Based on descriptions from 4 witnesses, a composite sketch was created and shared with the public through local TV and newspapers, seeking information about the person. As the search for evidence continued, hundreds of people from throughout the state gathered to help comb the wooded area around the station, hoping to find the missing Katie Poirier. Police used service dogs and helicopters to search for Katie, but their efforts yielded nothing. Her photo was widely circulated in newspapers and on billboards, making her case a high-profile missing persons investigation. Authorities checked the local sex offender facility, which was near the store where Katie disappeared, and confirmed that all inmates were present and accounted for. This information helped rule out the possibility of a kidnapping by a fugitive offender. Police then focused on searching for a vehicle with a specific license plate number, which led them to Donald Blom. However, the truck at his residence was white, not matching the description of the vehicle they were looking for. The official search for Katie ended on June 6, 1999, without any success. Despite the official search ending, many volunteers continue to look for Katie, hoping that someone might have seen something that could lead to her safe return. Investigators were also waiting for the perpetrator to make another mistake, which could help them crack the case. Maps marked searched areas, but Katie remained missing. 2 weeks later, a man called the hotline, reporting coworker Donald Hutchinson, who matched the composite sketch and had recently stopped driving his black pickup truck, was absent the day after the abduction and got a haircut. An investigation into Katie's disappearance revealed a surprising discovery about Donald Hutchinson. He was actually an alias for Donald Blom, a man who had a hidden black pickup truck in his garage and owned property just 12 miles from the store in Moose Lake where Katie worked. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered Blom's dark past, which included convictions for sex crimes involving the kidnapping of petite young girls, much like Katie. With this new information, detectives quickly obtained a search warrant for Blom's property. Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension agents tracked down Blom to a campground 140 miles outside of Richfield and brought him in for questioning. They also discovered that Blom had purchased the Moose Lake property 2 years prior, and neighbors confirmed he had been a frequent visitor until Katie's abduction. Blom's supervisor at the veterans' home where he worked stated that he had never seen Blom's real name, as he went by the alias Hutchinson, and was unaware of his criminal record. Colleagues described Blom as a loner who kept to himself. After his arrest, Blom initially cooperated with authorities but soon requested an attorney and refused to testify. Meanwhile, authorities conducted searches that yielded several items from Blom's home, but no official statement was made about what they found. Meanwhile, the search party resumed their efforts on the second day with increased enthusiasm. Katie's mother remained hopeful that her daughter was alive. On Donald Blom's property, fragments resembling bone were found in a fire pit's ashes. The fragments were sent to a lab and confirmed to be bone. A tooth was also found and sent to forensic dentist Dr. and Norlander for analysis. She used alternative methods to verify the tooth's origin, as DNA in the pulp would have been destroyed. A filling confirmed it was human and matched those used for Katie. Researchers identified it as a young woman's tooth, making it likely to belong to Katie. Katie Poirier's kidnapper, Blom, was charged with kidnapping and unlawful possession of a firearm, a federal offense due to his prior convictions. He was initially unwilling to consider a plea agreement, but later changed his mind, agreeing to testify on the condition that he be allowed to call home on September 8. During his confession, Blom recounted the events of May 26, 1999, stating that he had gone fishing and then returned to his home in Richfield, only to drive back to his Moose Lake residence. On his way, he stopped at a bar for a beer and saw Katie in a store while she was conducting business. Blom, who did not know Katie, grabbed her and forced her into his pickup truck. He then drove her to his home, where he strangled her to death from behind, a process that took approximately 20 minutes. Blom claimed that he did not commit any other type of assault on Katie. After killing her, he placed her body in a fire pit, gathered wood and paper, and attempted to burn her remains. However, Blom's account of the events was inconsistent with the video camera footage and the evidence found in the burn pit. According to Blom, Katie had asked him several times to let her go, but she did not struggle with him until he began choking her. Blom stated that he managed to kill Katie with his bare hands, but his recollection of the events was unclear and contradictory. Blom's account of burning Katie's remains was not believable. He claimed that he had burned her body to ashes using only wood and paper, but this was not possible. When questioned further, Blom admitted that he didn't know why he had made this claim, as it didn't make sense to him. After the interview, Blom contacted 2 local TV stations to report his confession and asked them to leave his family alone. As part of his plea deal, his wife was returned several confiscated items, including a parcel of land, a home, and the family car. However, Blom's confession caused significant distress for the Poirier family, who had been holding on to hope that Katie was still alive. Blom later recanted his confession, stating that it was false and made under duress. He claimed that the isolation of solitary confinement and the medication he was taking had caused him to hallucinate, leading him to tell the authorities what he thought they wanted to hear. A plea bargain was no longer an option, and both the prosecution and defense teams were getting ready for trial. It's not uncommon for people to falsely confess to a crime, and this can happen in a few ways. One type of false confession occurs when someone gives in to pressure from the police or interrogation and admits to a crime they didn't commit. Another type of false confession can occur when people are led to believe by the police that they have committed a crime, even if they didn't, and eventually they start to believe it themselves. Blom's trial began in June 2000 with a 5-week jury selection. The trial itself lasted another 5 weeks with numerous witnesses, including several crucial ones. Assistant Prosecutor Thomas Perler presented the case, and Blom's brother was an initial witness. He testified that he gave Blom a New York Yankees jersey, contradicting Blom's earlier claim that he never owned such a jersey, raising questions about potential perjury. More testimony came from 2 women who had been kidnapped by Blom in 1983. They bravely testified about the harm he had inflicted upon them, providing the jury with a first-hand account of Blom's capabilities. Notably, the women's appearances at the time of the kidnapping bore a resemblance to Katie's. Forensic experts specializing in dental evidence analyzed the partial tooth and confirmed that it matched Katie's age, gender, in dental records. Dr. and Norlander, who had initially been uncertain whether the object was even a tooth, testified that the tooth belonged to Katie. The defense called its first witness on August 7th. Amy Blom, Blom's wife, testified that her husband was at home the night Katie disappeared. From the stand, Amy explained that she inferred her husband's whereabouts after seeing a news broadcast about Katie's disappearance the next day. The location of the disappearance was near their country house on Moose Lake, 110 miles from their home. Given her husband's prior convictions, Amy assumed he would be a suspect, which is why she later recalled his exact location the night before. Blom arrived home at 9:30 p.m. to find his wife already in bed. The next morning, his spouse was still at home, having gotten up to start the day, and she had already made coffee. Blom's spouse also took the stand to testify about her experience with the police officers who had questioned her. She described how they had bullied her, implying that if she didn't answer their questions the way they wanted her to, they would take her children away. She further stated that the officers called her a liar. Additionally, when asked about a baseball jersey, she denied having seen her husband wear one or receiving one from her son-in-law among the clothes he had given them. As she gave her testimony, Blom became visibly emotional, crying and wiping away tears. On August 10th, Blom testified in his own defense. Under oath, he denied kidnapping Katie Poirier. During his 3-hour testimony, he alternated between speaking and crying, claiming his life was in shambles and that he was ill at the time of the crime. Blom admitted to the investigation that he had committed the crime, but later recanted his confession. He tried to gain sympathy from the jury by portraying himself as the victim, claiming he was under distress due to media pressure and his wife's threat to leave him. Blom changed his alibi, now stating that he was not at Moose Lake on the night of the crime. Instead, he claimed he was asleep at home with his wife, as she had previously stated. He admitted to being at Moose Lake earlier that evening but claimed to have returned home by 10 p.m. before Katie's disappearance. Appearing in court ultimately had no benefit for Donald Blom. Many perceived him as someone trying to dodge responsibility for his actions once again. At the conclusion of the questioning, Blom expressed frustration and made a last-ditch request to the judge, but it was denied. The case was then presented to the jury. Following a lengthy 10-hour deliberation, which included a 3-hour review of the recorded confessions, the jury found Donald Blom guilty of the crime. He received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Hannah Clark. Hannah Clark was born on September 8, 1988. By 2020, she was a devoted mother of 3 young children, 2 sweet girls, Aaliyah and Liana, and a rambunctious boy named Trey. Hannah's loved ones remember her as a kind and gentle soul with a bright smile that could light up anyone's heart. She was a selfless and caring mother who gave her all to her children. Hannah's family life was marked by her relationship with her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, a rugby player for the New Zealand Warriors team. Despite their significant age difference, they formed a strong bond, which deepened over time. Sue Clark, Hannah's mother, struggled to accept Rowan, but Hannah refused to listen to her concerns. People close to Rowan shared negative opinions about him. Sue, Hannah's mother, had a nagging feeling that something was off about Rowan. She perceived him as arrogant and self-centered, which made her uneasy. She was also concerned about the significant age gap between Rowan and Hannah. When they first met, Hannah was a recent graduate, while Rowan was 31 years old. Additionally, Rowan's past relationships were a worry for Sue, particularly since he was still in the process of divorcing his previous wife and was living with her at the time. When Hannah introduced Rowan to her parents, they questioned him about his ex-wife. Rowan explained that he was staying with her due to their son. Eventually, Rowan finalized his divorce and continued his relationship with Hannah. In 2011, he proposed to her, and she accepted. They got married in Kingsley, New South Wales, Australia. The following year, they had 3 children together. Hannah and her family, including her father Rowan, were passionate about sports. However, Rowan's muscular physique, developed during his professional athlete days, was partly due to steroid use, which led to mental health issues. As a personal trainer, Hannah's approach differed from her father's. She was loved by her clients for her kindness, empathy, and dedication, earning her a loyal following. Rowan's approach to training was unique, but his behavior was marred by aggression and inappropriateness, likely caused by steroid use. This made him a poor trainer, as clients don't need someone who makes them feel uncomfortable. Rowan struggled to communicate effectively with people, which negatively impacted his career and finances. As a result, his wife Hannah had to become the primary breadwinner, which further irritated Rowan. He felt emasculated by her success, as she was doing a better job than he was. Despite their financial struggles, they decided to open their own fitness club. However, this decision was largely driven by Rowan's desire to control Hannah's every move and monitor her whereabouts. Rowan's behavior in the store mirrored his past actions at the gyms where he worked. He often felt the need to assert superiority over women. During a private training session with Sue's mother, he showed his cruel side, acting inappropriately instead of showing respect. He dropped Sue, causing her to hit her head and bleed, and laughed at her clumsiness, showing no sympathy. Despite this alarming behavior, Hannah's parents tried to accept him for their daughter's sake. Rowan's control over Hannah was all-encompassing, and he isolated her from her family and friends. He dictated who she could see and when, and even forbade the children from visiting their grandmother and Hannah from communicating with her brother, whom he disliked. As a result, Hannah felt trapped and enslaved, confined to the walls of her own home. Rowan's behavior towards Hannah was also emotionally and physically abusive. He would demand intimacy from her, and if she refused, he would become enraged, taking out his anger on her and the children. After forcing himself on her, he would then apologize insincerely, attributing his behavior to a burst of passion. Hannah's life was slowly under the constant control and cruelty of her husband, Rowan. Their marriage, once filled with love and passion, had degenerated into a nightmare of fear and submission. Rowan's tyrannical behavior had created a toxic environment, where Hannah lived in constant terror of his wrath. Rowan's cruelty was not limited to Hannah, he also targeted their children. While some playful exchanges between parents and children are normal, Rowan frequently crossed the line, intentionally hurting and belittling them. When the children cried, he would mock them, showing no empathy or respect for their feelings. For example, a conflict between Rowan and his daughter Aaliyah turned disastrous when Rowan used excessive force, causing Aaliyah to hit her head. The injury was severe enough to require hospitalization and stitches. Instead of taking responsibility and apologizing, Rowan blamed Aaliyah for the incident. This was not an isolated incident, as Rowan had a history of tormenting his children. As an athlete, he would take ice baths after training, but he would also force his children, including his young son Trey, to sit in icy water, disregarding their tears and pleas for mercy. In the same year, Hannah's life took a drastic turn for the worse. Rowan, who had recently become interested in jiu-jitsu, returned home from a training session one day, still pumped up with adrenaline. Without warning, he physically attacked Hannah, grabbing her throat with a tight grip and uttering terrifying words. Consumed by fear, Hannah didn't immediately recognize that she was experiencing domestic violence. However, this incident was far more frightening than anything she had previously endured. As a result, Hannah made up her mind to leave Rowan at the earliest chance. After reaching out to the police, she provided a detailed account of the horrific experience to the officer. The police officer informed Hannah that forcing an intimate relationship without consent is a form of domestic violence. This conversation was a turning point for Hannah, helping her understand the situation and prompting her to take immediate action. She quickly gathered her children and left for her parents' house, trying to escape the abusive situation. Although their divorce was not yet finalized in November 2019, Hannah made the decision to allow Rowan to spend time with their children. However, she was aware that she had no legal authority to control this arrangement without a court's intervention. Even so, Hannah was still uneasy about leaving the children in Rowan's care. To fix his problem, Rowan was struggling to cope with his emotions and sought help from his church's pastor, Christopher. Christopher was a kind and supportive person who was always willing to listen. However, as Rowan began to open up to him, Christopher noticed some disturbing traits. Rowan had a desire for dominance and control, which he occasionally revealed when his confidence faltered. During one of these moments, Rowan confessed to Christopher that he was aware his actions were wrong and wanted to change, but didn't know how. Rowan's admission was a crucial step towards reform, and Christopher's guidance could have been instrumental in helping him. However, before progress could be made, a shocking event occurred. Hannah and her children were walking down the street when Rowan suddenly appeared out of nowhere, grabbed their daughter Lion, and disappeared. Hannah's life was turned upside down by unbearable anxiety and fear for her daughter Lion's safety. For 2 agonizing days, she had no idea where Lion was, and her distress grew by the minute. Hannah turned to the police, who launched a search and eventually found Lion safe and sound with her father. Although Lion was unharmed, the traumatic experience left a lasting impact on Hannah. The police, recognizing the danger that Hannah and her children faced, urged her to file a police report against her ex and obtain a protection order. However, despite the problems her ex, Rowan, had caused, he still had joint custody of the children, which he used to continue manipulating and abusing Hannah. After a meeting with Rowan, the children were returned to Hannah's parents. However, before leaving, Rowan attempted to humiliate Hannah by displaying pictures of her in her underwear on his car, in plain sight of their children. Hannah, enraged, tried to remove the photos, but Rowan responded violently. He grabbed her shoulder, twisted her arm, and punched her in the face, splitting her lip. The attack was only stopped when Hannah's mother, Sue, intervened. As Rowan drove away, he yelled insults. Hannah, traumatized, immediately reported the incident to the police, as it was a clear violation of the protection order. Unfortunately, the authorities were unable to respond in time, which ultimately led to a tragic outcome. It was a typical morning on February 19, 2020. Hannah grabbed her car keys and left her parents' house to drop off her 3 kids at kindergarten. Hannah and her children got into the car, but before they could leave, Rowan jumped in, causing Hannah to become frightened for their safety. She tried to calm Rowan down, but he was furious and began yelling threats and ordering Hannah to start the car and drive away. Hannah carefully drove off, trying not to escalate the situation. As she turned onto Raven Street, the car stopped. In a desperate and vengeful act, Rowan grabbed a canister of gasoline from under the car seat and drenched Hannah and her children with it. Michael ZCK, who happened to be nearby, witnessed the horrific scene. He said that earlier that morning, he had heard a car pull up outside his house. Hannah, frantic and pleading for help, screamed that Rowan was trying to kill her and pouring gasoline all over them. As Hannah begged for mercy, Rowan refused to let her go, his face twisted in a rage. Michael rushed to the car and was met with Rowan's emotionless face, holding a lighter in his hand. In the next moment, the car erupted in flames. The explosion was followed by blood-curdling screams, a deafening ringing, and then an eerie silence. Luckily, Hannah had narrowly escaped the inferno, but was left with severe burns and bleeding. Frantically, she pleaded for assistance, not for her own suffering, but for her children who remained trapped in the blazing car. A car happened to drive by, and a doctor who was not on duty stopped to offer assistance. Seeing Hannah's distress, the doctor rushed to her side. Meanwhile, Michael intervened quickly, grabbing a hose from his house to try and extinguish the flames. However, the fire was too intense, and it engulfed the entire car, leaving no hope of rescuing the children. The doctor and Michael yelled at Hannah to take cover and get away from the fire, but she was too consumed by grief to hear them. With growing desperation, Michael rushed to the car to rescue the children, but the intense flames and scorching heat thwarted his efforts. Hannah lay on the road, her body badly burned, repeatedly begging for someone to save her children. At that moment, no one grasped the full extent of the tragedy. Hannah's body was severely burned, with over 97% of her skin damaged, except for her feet. Despite her excruciating pain, Hannah's thoughts were consumed by her children, who were now left vulnerable and unprotected. Hannah's badly burned body left police doubting her survival chances. Yet, she refused to give up. With fierce determination, she provided a crucial testimony. Police officer Angus Cook carefully recorded every word Hannah spoke as she struggled to recount the events leading up to her tragic situation. With great difficulty, Hannah managed to name her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, as the person responsible for her ordeal, and provided a detailed account of what had happened. As Hannah's voice grew weaker and her body frail, Officer Angus remained by her side, offering words of encouragement and praise for her bravery. He reassured her that she had already done enough and that everything would be okay. Hannah was on the brink of death, yet she didn't fully grasp the horror unfolding around her. When questioned about whether Rowan had threatened her earlier, she replied that he hadn't. As doctors approached to alleviate her suffering, she lost the ability to speak. Meanwhile, Rowan Baxter's behavior was erratic. Despite suffering severe burns covering 80% of his body, he managed to exit the car unassisted. Rowan sat on the road, staring at the burning vehicle. After a brief moment, he inexplicably climbed back into the car, which was engulfed in flames. A witness, putting their own life at risk, attempted to extinguish the fire at the back of the car. It was then that Rowan retrieved a knife from the vehicle and began to chase people away, preventing them from putting out the flames. The children, trapped in the burning car, had little chance of survival. Nevertheless, bystanders refused to give up their efforts to save them. Rowan refused to let anyone approach the car, claimed them to a horrific death. In a final, selfish act, he stabbed himself with the knife. Despite her own life-threatening injuries, her primary concern was for the health of her children and her desire to reveal the truth. Tragically, Hannah passed away in the hospital on the same day, at the young age of 31. Hannah was a victim of severe domestic violence, which also affected her children. She fought tirelessly to protect her family from their abuser, but sadly, her efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Throughout her daily struggles, Hannah showed immense courage, standing up for her loved ones despite the numerous challenges she faced. For days later, a massive gathering took place to pay tribute to Hannah and her children. A lasting memorial, Hannah's House, was also created in Camp Hill, where a tree planting ceremony was held in her honor, accompanied by a plaque that tells the story of her life.